Garrett Mance wandered into the kitchen of his mother's house, once again late for dinner. The 19-year-old, well-built young man seemed completely incapable of sticking to a schedule, a trait that drove his mother, Wilma Mance, into fits of rage. Wilma was not easy to live with under any circumstances, and when she was angry, she was impossible to be around. Many years ago, Jerome Mance, Garrett's paternal grandfather, severed all ties with Wilma, the woman his only son George had once married. Despite their estrangement, Jerome maintained contact with his grandson, although their time together was limited. Garrett's lateness today was due to a visit to his grandfather. They spent the day in the forest, fishing by the stream. Like many of their fishing trips, there was more talking and drinking than actual fishing. They lost track of time as they made their way through the cooler of beer Jerome had brought with him. Jerome believed that Garrett was old and mature enough to drink responsibly under his supervision, regardless of the law, a belief that unsurprisingly did not endear him to Wilma. But then, probably, nothing will ever happen. Garrett grew up without a father, as his biological father died shortly after his divorce from Wilma almost 16 years ago. If Wilma didn't need financial and occasional childcare support, she would have kept Garrett away from his grandparents completely. Allowing him to visit them irritated her, given her mutual disdain for them. She resented the fact that she had to work after the divorce, blaming Jerome for supporting George during the proceedings and helping him protect his assets. She never admitted that her infidelity was the reason for the divorce. Instead, she blamed Jerome for ensuring that she received only the standard 50% of the family estate. It felt like a betrayal to her that she didn't get more, even though George's assets mostly belonged to Jerome and his company. She didn't even receive child support because her salary was higher than George's, something she also blamed on Jerome, who owned the business where they both worked. Despite her resentment, Wilma managed to convince the court that she was the better parent by securing custody of Garrett and his younger sister Beatrice. She received a modest amount of child support, but it ended more than a year ago, when Garrett turned 18. She now saw Garrett as just another burden, a financial drain that she had to continue to finance. For the past 16 years, Wilma had worked the same job without ever receiving a promotion, another one she attributed to Jerome. In her mind, Jerome is responsible for everything that has gone wrong since she was caught cheating. She never let Garrett forget about it, constantly reminding him that he was a man, and therefore partly to blame. Wilma's bitter nature was evident even before graduating from high school, where she was known as a cold and calculating person. George was warned by friends and family not to marry her, but he was captivated by her beauty. She hid her true nature well enough to secure the marriage and give birth to Garrett before George realized that he had married the man his friends had warned him about. He endured her abuse for almost 4 years before he filed for divorce after catching her cheating. During the divorce, Wilma's sense of her rights only grew. She believed that she deserved a life of luxury simply because she was beautiful, and she felt that everything she wanted was rightfully hers. The fact that George, the family's breadwinner, did not agree was no excuse for her having to work or go without. She expected the family to step in and provide the lifestyle to which she was entitled, but Jerome refused. Over the years, Wilma often reflected bitterly on her situation. She felt abandoned, just as Garrett's great-great-grandfather allegedly abandoned his responsibilities after the family bank closed during the Depression. In reality, he sold the bank's deposit accounts and liabilities to another bank, but Wilma thought he had simply walked away, just as George had walked away from their marriage. She believed that the family had money, but refused to help her and took out her anger on Garrett and Jerome whenever possible. Even her own parents refused to support her, saying they had no money. She knew better, but what could she do? At least both sets of grandparents took care of Garrett and Beatrice. All Wilma had to spend her meager salary on was herself and a few household bills. It had been 15 years since his father left home, and Garrett barely remembered him. George Mance did leave home after the divorce, but he did not intentionally abandon his family. He died in an accident while moving to another state for work. Because of his grandchildren, his grandfather decided not to abandon Wilma completely, despite her character. He simply continued to pay court-ordered child support as if it came from his son. Garrett knew that if it weren't for his grandfather, he probably wouldn't have any memories of his father, or at least no pleasant memories of him. His mother spent a lot of time trying to destroy his father and grandfather. She criticized his father for daring to divorce her and then disappearing. She criticized his grandfather for forcing her to work to support herself. She thought she should receive the money from the insurance policies rather than putting it in trust for her children. To be honest, Garrett was not the young man he potentially could have been. His intelligence was almost off the charts at a high level, but his motivation to succeed was almost off the charts at the other end of the spectrum. In other words, he was supremely happy to wallow in the mud of mediocrity. Hunting, fishing, and hiking were much more important to him than school and work. Of course, chasing women rated the same as the other three, as did eating and drinking, when he could find someone to bring him alcoholic beverages. He attended local college and did what was once called Gentleman C. He will eventually transfer to a nearby four-year institution to earn some kind of degree. He readily admitted that his college attendance was intended to keep his mother and grandparents quiet and to keep him from having to find a full-time job. Garrett worked part-time as a janitor and helper for a local building contractor to earn most of his money. He liked the work he did for them. It required no mental effort and little physical effort. He liked the work, but had no idea if he wanted to do this kind of work for a career. He even liked that he was allowed to do some simple jobs that would normally be done by a carpenter or one of the other professional builders. He learned a lot from his job and found the work exciting, especially the renovation work. Anyway, this evening when Garrett walked into the kitchen, the screaming bitch better known as his mother confronted him again. As soon as he let the door slam shut again, his mother rushed to confront him and screamed, "Garrett, where the hell have you been? You were supposed to be home before I finished work, and obviously you weren't. None of what I assigned you, you didn't even start cooking dinner like I told you. And look at yourself. Water and river mud on your clothes, not dust and dirt from some construction site. You sneaked out and went fishing again, didn't you? And you smell like a brewery. I'm guessing you managed to find some beer to drink? What am I supposed to do with you, Garrett? If you don't stop hanging around, no decent woman will ever look at you seriously. No woman worth her salt is interested in someone who can't give her the best things in life. Now go upstairs and clean up." Garrett was so used to his mother's behavior that he simply mentally shrugged and accepted her diatribe. As he began to walk up the stairs, his sister Beatrice, Bitch B, as most of her peers called her, came down to them. As usual, she took up all the space and pushed Garrett away, growling, "Get out of my way, asshole." In Garrett's opinion, Evil B was already several orders of magnitude higher than his mother's level of anger. Only the very highest, in their opinion, class at school could tolerate her. She and they made existence a living hell for all lesser mortals who came into contact with them. She was simply magnificent, she knew it, and she demanded that all mere mortals bow down and scratch her feet. She was the main leader of the cheerleading squad and used this position to control mere mortals as well. Garrett allowed B to walk past him without comment as he continued up the stairs. Damn, he thought, I need to find a way to get out of here. I'm sick to death of the attitude in this house. Maybe if I find a better job. No. The assholes expect me to work twice as hard and get paid a little more than what I earn now. Damn, something's gotta happen. Hope it's soon. I don't know how long my mother will tolerate me. She's already making comments about me investing more in household expenses and getting a better job. Curse. Life went on for a few more weeks. Garrett put up with his mother and sister while he continued to take lousy classes at school and live on weekends when he could get away and go to the woods or creeks. He and his grandfather had several excellent places to fish and camp in the woods along a creek that ran through his grandfather's small farm. Over the 4th of July weekend, Garrett and his grandfather went camping and fishing again. For them, it was the perfect way to celebrate the birth of a nation. For Bitchy B, Wilma, and Garrett's now ex-girlfriend, that wasn't the case. They all felt that Garrett had been unreasonable when he refused to stay in town and serve 3 women and their friends at their poolside gala at Wilma's parents' house. When he refused to come and help Grandpa Strum fetch, carry, and prepare food, all 3 of them were unloaded on him. His friend Paulina informed him that he would either attend the party for her and his sister, or she would find someone to take his place. He didn't show up and she found a replacement. The party fiasco was just another in a long list of what Garrett considered neglect and disaster caused by insensitive and selfish women. None of them cared that she and Grandpa always spent the 4th fishing and camping together. None of them even thanked him for all the work he had done in helping prepare for the party in advance. Hell, he even invited Paulina to go fishing with them, but she rather viciously refused. Garrett sat by the fire at dusk on the 4th, eating freshly caught fish, fried potatoes and onions, pork and beans, while he and his grandfather talked. He had just finished explaining his current problems with the women in his life and took a long sip of beer to wash down his last bite. Grandpa Jerome leaned back and looked at Garrett for a moment and then said, "Garrett, I don't know exactly what to tell you, son. I can tell you something that might help, but you need to understand some of what I'm saying. Perhaps your advice is wrong because of how I feel about your mother. I know I yelled at you over and over again when I heard you call her and your sister a bitch. You must respect your mother, son. She raised you into this world and took care of you for 19 years. You have a sister, about whom you are also obliged to take care of the family. Blood really is thicker than water. Now that I said it all again, I have to tell you that your mother is a nasty, selfish bitch, and she taught your sister to be just like her. I find it difficult to be polite to them, and that's just a fact. Your grandmother felt the same way before she died. We simply treated them as we would like to be treated and lived as best we could in spite of them. You should do the same. Now, regarding the girlfriends you make and lose, I may be able to help if you really want help and will listen to me. First of all, son, the old saying is true. Beauty is only skin deep. You keep choosing beautiful things, the women you date are usually one of your sister's friends or one of the cool bitches from school. Don't get me wrong. Many of these women are wonderful, noble women. Just because they are beautiful doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. Don't date them. You just need to stop dating them because they are beautiful. You need to find a kind, gentle, decent, ethical woman who has the same or complementary interests as yours. Did it, son? And you need to look for inner beauty more than outer beauty. You need to think about the future too, Garrett. You're a brilliant person, but your grades don't show it, son. You need to do better in school. You need to do your life's work. Put up with a loser, son. I know that you are still young and want to enjoy the remnants of your youth, but you will soon be 20 years old. When I was 20, my wife and child were already working full-time while I was attending college at night. It's much easier for you than it is for me, and you have to choose what to do with your life. This solution will help you find yourself suitable woman. Find one that will support your work and chosen lifestyle. Find someone who will be happy with the level of income that your chosen profession will bring. Stay away from those demanding, selfish girls you've been dating and find a woman of substance. Maybe you should take a step back and take a breather, son. Know yourself and then find and meet your woman. I did all this with your grandmother, rest her soul, and we lived a wonderful life together. Same thing, we liked to camp and fish and we worked together too. I found a wonderful woman, and you can too, son. Garrett wanted to protest some of his grandfather's statements, but when he began to do this, he thought to himself, he's at least partly right. Many of the girls I dated were from my sister's group of friends or acquaintances or one of my mother's friends' daughters. They were all from the high end of the school. They were all demanding and only wanted the best when we went out. None of them wanted to do what interested me. Hell, he might be right about the rest. After a quick introspection, Garrett said, "I'll think about it, Grandpa, but you certainly spend a lot of time just messing around rather than working, and you seem to be doing just fine." "Yes, son, but when I was young, I worked." "You forget that I'm retired now and live off my pension and investments." Okay, but I remember when I was younger and you probably spent a lot of time drinking coffee in cafes and fishing. Why is this normal for you and not for me? If I am happy with this life, then I must. Can I survive this too? A person always has the right to live his life the way he wants, son, as long as he does not do anything illegal or harmful to others. I just want what's best for you. After drinking a couple more bottles of beer, the two men put out the fire and climbed into their sleeping bags. The next morning they got up and enjoyed a cup of coffee, watching the fog rise from the river. After breakfast they grabbed a beer and went fishing. After the fish stopped biting, they swam, rested, and ate some more hair of the dog while they waited for the evening for the fish to feed again. After a long weekend, Garrett returned to his summer job at a construction company. He didn't date, but spent some time with girls and women who hung out with the men he worked with. Many of them were nothing more than barflies. Some were either the wives or lovers of his friends, or their friends. He noticed a clear difference in the way they acted, as well as their wants and needs from the girls he had interacted with before. They were more like one of the guys, but with special equipment. Damn, they were fun. Perhaps he was fishing on the wrong hole. In the third week of July, Garrett wandered into a local shopping center and found a National Guard recruiter trying to convince the teenagers hanging around there to join. Garrett ignored him and his younger audience and moved on to his favorite car. It depicts a soldier patrolling the jungle. The goal was to kill enemy soldiers as they appeared, not to harm unarmed civilians or their friends. After Garrett played a couple of games, he noticed he had an audience. He turned around and the sergeant said, "You're very good at this game, son. Have you ever thought about joining the Guard and learning patrol skills for real? We can give you a very good deal right now. There is a multi-occupation signing bonus if you meet the requirements and earn money while you train for any number of professions. After your initial training, you return home and spend the next 6 or 8 years attending meetings every weekend a month and attending a 2-week summer camp each year. In addition, you get paid for 4 days of weekend meetings and full salary and benefits for 2 weeks in the summer." Yes? And how much is this easy money worth? And how long will I have to be away to complete the basic training I heard about? Well, son, your salary depends on several factors. One enters as a private E1, unless he has a civilian education beyond high school, then he can enter at the private first class, PFC, level, which is an E3. Did you graduate from high school, and if so, do you have any college credits now, son? Yes, I currently have 60 semester hours in college. I am a student at a local community college and just completed my associate's degree in construction technology. I'll have to go to a 4-year college next semester if I want to keep going. Great. Then we can probably sign you up as a PFC and you'll make really good money right away. You can start at about $1,700 per month while you complete basic and advanced training, plus housing and per diem. While you lived in the barracks and ate in the canteen, you did not receive housing or livelihood. If you lived off the position, you would receive this in addition to your base salary. Once you get home, you'll get about $258 a month for every weekend and $903 for 2 weeks in the summer. That's a pretty good price to pay for hanging out with a group of great guys and serving your country. Something about the business proposal got through to Garrett. Or maybe he was just so angry with his mother that he decided to run away for a while. What made him make this decision is unknown, but he said, I think I'll do it. Grandpa and I have talked about the army before and he thinks it's a good deal. Great. My documents are in the car outside if you want to come with me. Then we can start today. When I make an appointment for your tests and physical, I will take you to them. If you pass, we'll give you a report date and you'll be done. Until you report to basic level, you will join your unit for monthly meetings, but will not be eligible for deployment if called upon. Garrett's ASFOB test, a test to determine his ability to perform various jobs in the military that helps qualify him for a military occupational specialty, or MOS, went extremely well. He was an excellent physical specimen, so the physical examination also revealed no problems. After receiving the results of the physical examination and ASFOB test, the recruiter was very optimistic. He called Garrett and said, "Garrett, you can almost write your own ticket to the Guard. You have a great test score and I can place you in almost any MOS we have. I have units that need aircraft mechanics, wheel mechanics, supplies, even doctors. You tell me what interests you and I'll probably find you a position. I just want to be a soldier. Do you have any infantry positions open? Well, yes, but you don't want to do it. You can have a great job. Hey, I need to take a position as a medic in one of the infantry battalions, how about that? You could be in an infantry unit. And you could still get excellent training. You can even quite easily find a job in civilian life as an EMT after completing your medical course at Fort Sam Houston. You will likely need a little additional training to operate a civilian ambulance. After finishing school at Fort Sam, it will be easy. I don't know. I never really thought about something like that. Listen, try it. If you don't like it, maybe they will let you change your job to something else, but with a score like yours, it won't be a problem for you. Heck, it even comes with a small sign-up bonus. Because they really need doctors. Okay, let's do this. Where should I sign? Garrett signed the papers and reported to basic training the last week of August. He was a natural. He had been wandering the forest since he was a little boy, so he could move quietly and knew how to camouflage himself so that the wild animals he hunted would not notice him. He knew how to pitch tents and navigate well, and he shot like the legendary Daniel Boone. Perhaps the only problem Garrett had with basic training was that it came too easy to him. He didn't have many friends when he told his fellow interns, "You guys need to stop whining. This is the easiest money I've ever made. Where else can you get paid to wander around the woods and shoot rifles and blow things up? Hell, I thought the PT, physical training, would be at least hard, but that's nothing." Garrett mastered his skills well and graduated, although he did not finish very high in the standings due to his tendency to miss every chance he had. He didn't mind the work, but why bother if it wasn't necessary? After the basic course, he was immediately sent to in-depth individual training to become a physician. Once again, he passed the exam with no problem studying, but was stuck in the middle of the rankings due to his tendency to retreat. He excelled in the field portion of his training and in the classroom. Unfortunately, he was not what is called initiative. Someone always had to tell him what to do and when to do it. However, once he was given the job, he did it to the best of his ability and as quickly as possible. Of course, he got the job done quickly so he could, you guessed it, leave. After completing his training, Garrett returned home and began a new life as a part-time soldier. He returned in time to enjoy the summer with his grandfather again. He even returned to his old job at a construction company. Now he felt as if he was ready. He had a great part-time military job and another great part-time civilian job. He could hunt and fish whenever he wanted, and he had more money than ever before. Life was good. In fact, he thinks the old saying, "It doesn't get any better than this," might have been written for Garrett. On a particularly hot Wednesday night in late August, Garrett staggered home from work and ran into his mother. She said, "Garrett, your grandfather died this morning. I think you need to organize a funeral for the old bastard or something." Garrett walked over to the sofa and sat down on it. He looked at his mother in shock, not knowing what to do or say. He felt empty. My chest tightened and it became difficult to breathe. He tried to speak, but could not say a word. Almost as soon as he sat down on the couch, his mother started screaming, "Damn it, Garrett, get your dirty ass off my furniture. You know it's better not to sit on furniture in work clothes. Now go upstairs and clean up. Dinner will be ready in 10 minutes. We won't wait for you." Garrett felt a wave of anger come back to add to the one he had felt when his mother told him his grandfather had died this way. He was also angry because he died that morning and she didn't even call him at work to tell him about it. Garrett's face turned red and he almost jumped to his feet. He opened his mouth to scold his mother for her behavior, but she beat him to it, releasing her bitch again. "Don't argue with me. You know the rules in this house. After you clean up and we eat, you need to call Barker Funeral Home to make arrangements. Why didn't you even call me at work, Mom? You didn't need to be distracted. You need this money to help with expenses here. From now on, I will need to have at least $100 a week in addition to the things you buy to make ends meet from then on. The old bastard is dead. This is what he gave me for Beatrice and I am sure this will stop now and I will probably have to find a way to get more money from his estate or your trust funds." Around this time, Beatrice entered the room. She was dressed to kill and her makeup was flawless. Bea looked at her mother and brother and said, "What are you doing here, Mom? You know I need to go see Rebecca. We're going to a show and I can't be late. Isn't it dinner ready yet?" Garrett knew she didn't care about his grandfather any more than his mother did, but her callous attitude angered him. He turned to Beatrice and said, "Why don't you just shut up? Grandpa died and all you can think about is being late to go out with your friends? You really are a selfish bitch, aren't you?" Beatrice turned to face Garrett and growled, "You're a fucking asshole. What do you care if I go out with my friends or not? Besides, maybe now that the selfish old goat is gone, we can get some of his money and live better. Garrett looked at his mother, but she didn't say anything, so he turned back to Beatrice and said, "You know, you're right. It's none of my business what you do and I really don't care. I'm leaving here." Garrett rushed upstairs, leaving the two women with shocked expressions on their faces. He quickly took a shower and went to his room. He packed most of his clothes into an old army duffel bag and carried it downstairs. He placed his bag by the door and went back upstairs to get his computer and important papers. Before he walked out the door to load his things into the truck, he heard his mother and sister laughing in the kitchen as their dishes clanged and scraped. Garrett loaded his first load into the truck and returned to get the clothes. As he left for the second time, he let the door slam. Before he got into the truck, his mother stood at the door, staring at him. She said, "Damn it, Garrett. You know better than to slam doors. Now get your ass over here and close the door properly. Where the hell are you going anyway?" Garrett looked at his mother and said, "I don't know where I'm going, but I'm sure I won't stay here anymore." He climbed into his truck, started it and drove off as his mother watched him go. Garrett went to a small grill bar frequented by construction crews. When he entered, there were several people there that he had worked with or knew from his infrequent visits in the past. Almost all of them expressed condolences over the death of their grandfather. Some of them asked why he was here. Garrett said, "I had to leave home. I finally came to an agreement with my mom and B. They didn't even tell me about Grandpa until I got home and then, in the same sentence, Mom demanded $100 a week for expenses in addition to what I gave her. She said that now that he was gone, he wouldn't give her money for B and I would have to step up. She's already trying to find a way to gain access to some of the trust funds we hold and get money from them. Now I don't mind helping. I've actually been buying my own clothes and stuff since I graduated high school. I even help with the food, but she could wait at least until after the funeral." Then, on top of that, she said that I need to take care of all the preparations and called him all sorts of names. B was there and all she cared about was getting food so she and her friends could go out. When I left, they were sitting in the dining room laughing and joking while eating dinner, and I just came here to grab a hamburger before going to the funeral home and taking care of everything. Kathy Wilson, his boss's daughter, came over and hugged him and then said, "Oh, Garrett, I'm so sorry. We all just heard about your grandfather. If there is anything I can do to help, please let me know. And sit with us while you prepare dinner." Garrett began to relax as he ate and listened to his friends talk. Katie and a couple of friends sat more or less on the sidelines, but made occasional comments in the general conversation. Garrett found himself wishing his family were more like his work acquaintances. He couldn't call them friends yet, but he felt that at least some of them could become friends. Having finished his meal, Garrett pushed back his chair and began to rise. Bill looked up and said, "Hey, Garrett, where are you going so early? Are you already tired of our company?" "No, Bill, I just have things I need to do before it's too late. Mom is making me take care of the preparations for Grandpa, and I need to find a place to stay before it's too late." Katie looked at it and asked, "What do you mean you need to find a place to stay? I thought you were still living with your mom and sister." "Yeah, well, I guess I kind of burned that bridge when I left tonight. I guess I'll go to Grandpa's and stay there for a while. At least until I find another place or get kicked out." "Bill, I think it's okay to miss work for the rest of the week, right?" "Hell yeah. Don't worry. If you need more time, call me Sunday night or early Monday and we can work something out. Let us know where and when the services will be, please." Jerome Mance was buried Saturday in a local cemetery next to his wife. To Garrett's surprise, Wilma arrived. Unsurprisingly, Beatrice did not do this. After the service, Wilma cornered Garrett and said, "I called Jerome's lawyer on Thursday to ask about his assets, but he didn't tell me anything about it. Do you know what's happening to him?" "No. I haven't heard anything, and unlike you, I have more important things to do." Garrett turned around and walked away. Just BEF. Or Garrett got into his truck. Wilma yelled, "Hey, Garrett. Where are you staying? I really need to know how to find you if I need anything." "Oh yeah, I haven't received your payment for last week yet. Food and rent too. When will you give it to me? Garrett stopped and looked at Wilma again, his whole body cringing, waiting for her reaction to what he was about to say. I now live in my grandfather's house. As for the money, I'm not going to send it to you. I no longer live with you and I will need everything I earn to pay my living expenses in college. Education. What? You know, I told you I'm now looking forward to another $100 a week to make ends meet and buy the things Beatrice needs. Sorry, darling, but this is the least I can take from you. Garrett just looked at her, then climbed into his trusty old truck and drove away. He was amazed by her reaction. On Monday evening, Wilma met him at her grandfather's house when he returned from work. She got out of the car and walked over to his truck. As soon as he opened the door, she said, I came for the $100 you owe. We really can't wait any longer. Before Garrett could say anything, she raised her hand and rushed forward. I know you don't live with me anymore. No problem. However, you still live in my house, so the rent for this place is $125 per week, paid in advance. If you want, you can pay monthly. Nonsense. I told you I need everything I earn to get by. You'll have to find someone else to support you. Besides, this is not your home. We don't know whose it is now, but since I understand the laws of inheritance, you can never rent it out or sell it. It should go to either me, or Beatrice, or both of us. In any case, you do not have to pay rent. Well, let the court decide. Damn it, Garrett, I need more money to live. It wouldn't hurt if you gave us some. If you came home, we could easily earn what we both earn. I know that you make good money in the Guard. And you're still working part-time for that construction company. You know, you could give us some money to help. No, sorry Mom, that won't happen. I have living expenses here and I still have to pay for college. It's not cheap, I tell you. Or were you going to take over parenting and pay for college for me? Garrett closed and locked his truck and walked around his heated mother. He entered the house and closed the door in her face, making sure it was locked. On Friday of the following week, Garrett received a call from Wilma. She said, Garrett, you and Beatrice have a letter from Jerome's lawyer. They want you and her to come to the reading of the will next Wednesday at 10 in the morning in their office. I haven't received my letter yet. I hope I will receive it soon, because neither your letter nor Beatrice's letter told me about the estate or the distribution. You mean you opened my letter and read it? Well, yes. Why not? I'm your mother and I have to take care of your business for you. Well, maybe because it was addressed to me, and you're not allowed to open other people's mail? I'll come after work and pick it up. Well, I don't have it anymore. I hired a lawyer to represent us so we don't get screwed. I gave him the letters. This angered Garrett and he jumped into his truck for a quick trip to the local post office. He rented himself a post office box and changed the address so that Wilma could no longer open mail. Garrett arrived at the prosecutor's office on the appointed day in time for the reading of the will. Wilma and Beatrice were already there, along with the lawyer they had hired. Wilma glared at him as he entered, and Beatrice, as usual, ignored him. Exactly at the appointed time, they were again called into the conference room for the reading of the will. First of all, the lawyer checked the identities, then opened the folder with papers. He said, at this meeting, arrangements will be made for the distribution of the estate of the late Jerome Mance. All legal debts must be paid from the remainder of the estate before the remainder is distributed to the survivors as directed by him in his will. Once final bills have been paid and any and all valid debts have been paid, the property will be distributed as per the will. Before his death, Jerome executed certain deeds of transfer of property that affected a portion of his property. Beatrice Mance would receive the house and the 20 acres immediately surrounding it. According to the attached survey, he gave Wilma and Garrett the folder. Garrett Mance will receive the remainder of the farmland and property located at 3 Main Street, Stella, Missouri, formerly known as Bank of Stella, as well as all contents of that building. Any remaining cash in bank accounts and any investments. The remainder of the estate, excluding those which also pass on death, after all bills have been paid, will be divided equally between Beatrice and Garrett Mance. The property does not have to go through probate because Mr. Mance executed a transfer on death deed directly several years ago. Transfer the property to his designated heirs. Bank accounts and personal property must be verified, but the value of these items is minimal. The lawyer looked at each of the three present and asked, "Are there any questions?" Wilma, who was red-faced, said, "Yes, there are. I didn't hear anything about me in that will. What will I get?" "Nothing, I'm afraid, ma'am. You are not related by blood to Mr. Mance and he did not choose to provide for you in his will, so you will receive nothing from his estate. As you heard, all property goes to your daughter and son. The house and land your daughter inherits should remain in her trust until she becomes a legal adult. This is ridiculous. He can't do this. I won't allow this." "I'm afraid he can, and he did, ma'am. You have the legal right to contest the will, but I warn you that it will stand, and by contesting you will simply reduce the amount your children receive due to additional legal and court costs." "Is this really what you want from them?" "No. We need everything we can get to live." "Wait, are you saying the house belongs to Beatrice?" "Yes, I suppose that can be arranged, but since it will be her money, we will have to ensure that it will be used solely for her benefit." "Okay then. Garrett has lived in this house since his grandfather died. He refused to pay me rent for this place. I demand that you take $125 a week from his inheritance and pay me rent for this place." The lawyer looked shocked. He turned to Garrett and said, "Really, Garrett? Have you moved into the house and agreed to the rent?" "I moved into this house the night my grandfather died. I never agreed to any rent. My mother demanded $100 a week from me to live at home. I was already buying most of the food and paying my own expenses, so I felt like I was asking for too much. She and B were such greedy bitches that I decided to leave because the house was empty and I had nowhere else to go, so I moved there." "I'm sorry, son, but you didn't have the authority to do this. Your mother is right. Since the house technically belongs to your sister, you need to either vacate the premises or pay rent. I will do some research to find out, determine fair market value and tell you how much to pay." "This is nonsense. I can't afford to pay that much for rent, housing, and college tuition from what I earn." "Wait, are you saying that the old bank is now mine? Fuck this. I'll just move into it. If I remember correctly, my grandfather said that there were once apartments upstairs. I'll just move into one of the empty apartments on the second floor. I won't have to pay rent?" The lawyer smiled and said, "Yes, I believe it will work, and no, you won't have to pay your own rent." Wilma squealed, "Well, what about the money he owes for rent? We really need more money. And how do you expect us to live if he doesn't pay? I can't live on my salary alone." Garrett listened as the lawyer spoke. "I will determine the fair market value of the lease and deduct that amount from his inheritance, which will be paid to your daughter, Mrs. Mance. As for how you'll handle finances, I'm not sure. I thought you worked full-time." "Well, yes, but I can't live on it. You know, I only make about $48,000 a year." "I'm sorry that you have problems with such a salary, but it's hard for me to understand. You make more than a lot of people in this field and they do a great job. You can live quite comfortably on this amount." The lawyer leaned back in his chair and added, "Unless there are any more questions, I think that's all for today." When everyone got up and started to leave, Wilma and Beatrice came out first. The lawyer then said, "Garrett, could you stay a few more minutes? I have some other matters to discuss with you." After his mother and sister left, the lawyer signaled to his assistant to close and lock the door. Turning to Garrett, he said, "I'm sure you've noticed that the items we discussed today were far fewer than what belonged to your grandfather. I'm surprised your mother didn't notice this and ask about the other property. Before he died, your grandfather transferred all of his business assets to his permanent employees using a transfer on death (TOD) deed. This means that those assets never became part of his estate, and the assets are not left to you and your sister. I'm also surprised that your mother and sister didn't mention this business during our conversation, especially since your mother works there." The lawyer reached into the folder, pulled out a letter and handed it to Garrett. "Your grandfather left you this letter. Please take a few minutes to read it, and if you have any questions, we can discuss them before we move on to other issues. Garrett opened the letter and began to read. It said, in particular, Garrett, you have brought me great joy. I know this may sound strange, but I love you very much. I have left you the means to make a good living if you are willing to put in the work. Perhaps your only flaw is your laid-back attitude. I had hoped that your enlistment in the Guard would change that, as the Army often helps boys become men. I was so proud when you enlisted. Unfortunately, it seems like you only work enough to survive. If this is your choice in life, so be it. But if not, it's time to give it your best shot. With your intelligence, there is no limit to what you can achieve. You can take it easy, as I did later in life, enjoy short trips with the Guard and still maintain a comfortable life, or you can strive for success. I hope and pray that you decide to succeed because you have the potential to do so. I know it can be a difficult time with your mother and sister, and I'm sorry you have to deal with that. Legally, I can exclude your mother from my will, but I cannot do the same with your sister. Felt a moral obligation to leave her something, so I gave her a house and a small plot of land. She could live well there if she limited her expenses. This would be a good place for her and her future husband. But I suspect she is. And your mother will sell it and spend the money. In any case, I fulfilled my duty to her. As for your inheritance, I hope that you will preserve this land and enjoy it, either by farming it as I once did, or simply by fishing and camping as we once did. I also left you the old bank building and the land on which it is located. As you know, I haven't been in the bank since it closed and I don't remember exactly what else was inside. I know there are stock certificates there that are now yours and they have provided most of my income. Everything else in the bank now belongs to you. I never returned after my father died, but I regularly sent maintenance personnel to check the roof and make sure the building was in good condition. We had to remove the external stairs to the apartments to prevent access, but when this was done the building was in fair condition for its age. We also demolished the landing and the front and side terraces to prevent children from going upstairs. Structurally sound. What you do with it is up to you, use it or sell it. Some old furniture can even fetch a good price if you decide to sell it. Remember this old man with love and affection, remember the good times if you want. I'll do the same for you. Goodbye, son. After reading the letter, Garrett leaned back in his chair and looked at the lawyer. When he saw Garrett lean back, he said, "Your grandfather left me some money as a deposit, Garrett. He expects your mother to try to contest the will. Legal services until they run out or I retire, at which point I must transfer the remaining amount to you. Your grandfather listed the property and stock accounts as TOD, but there is little left in the brokerage business. And your sister will receive confirmation of the transfer of ownership of the property, which you will receive as TOD. I have already provided his death certificate to the agencies that require it and have begun the transfer for you and your sister. The only thing you need to go through. The will includes several personal belongings and bank accounts. You can take possession of your building and land at any time. Now I need to come to the next meeting. If you have any questions or need additional help, just call me, please, Garrett. You will find the keys to the bank at Stacy's for your exit." That same day, Garrett went to his grandfather's old house and collected his few belongings. He walked up to the old bank and looked around with the intention of moving into one of the apartments. As he entered the building, he sneezed at the smell of the long-closed building. To his surprise, there were still papers, calendars and writing materials on all the tables and cash registers. It was as if someone had left the day before and expected to return to work again the next day. Unfortunately, there were no stairs from the inside to the upper floors. He went outside and saw a door at the side of the building on the second and third floors, but it was impossible to get to it. He remembered how many years ago his grandfather hired a company to come down the outside stairs because children were breaking into apartments and playing on the stairs. He will either have to live in the bank itself or build stairs to get to the apartments. At least the concrete bases for the stairs and balcony supports still remain. Oh, well, for now he'll have to make do with the bank itself. His first task was to get electricity and water back into the building. As a result of the inspection, he realized that he would have to rewire the building because the wires were of an old type with fabric insulation and their use was far from safe. The building never had city water, so he needed to take care of that too. When the bank closed, it actually used its own well. He was sure that everything was dry now or that the pipes in or pump were not working. Besides, there was city water, so why redo the well? The next morning Garrett got up early. He usually slept late whenever possible, but the hard floor of the bank was not conducive to lying down and dozing. He quickly got dressed and headed to the door, intending to find something to eat, perhaps at a nearby cafe. He was still sleepy, so he wasn't paying attention as he walked out the bank's front door onto the sidewalk. He walked out directly in front of Katie Wilson and her father as they also headed towards the cafe. He saw them out of the corner of his eye and stumbled, nearly falling, trying to avoid colliding with them. Katie reached out and grabbed him to keep him from falling. She said, "Garrett, where did you come from? You appeared almost out of thin air, as if you had come out of an old bank." "Well, yes, I did it. Grandfather left the bank to me when he died. Since I have nowhere to stay, I spent the night there. I guess this will be my new home for a while. My mother kicked me out of my grandfather's house yesterday. She inherited it and wanted to rent out almost all of my salary from the construction company, so I came here." "Wow. Well, come with me and Dad. We're going to the cafe for breakfast." "Yes, me too. I don't know what to do with food and water. The old bank has no electricity or water and I'll have to rewire and reconnect it before it gets here. No electricity means I have to go out to eat or have a sandwich because I can't afford anything else." Bill looked up after hearing Garrett's words. He said, "No light and water? You can't live like this. Let's go check out the old place after we eat. Maybe we can do something about it for you." After eating, all three headed to the bank. As she walked through the door, Katie stopped and looked around. "Wow," she whispered. "It's really great. It's definitely not like modern banks." Katie walked around, picked up a few items, looked at them and put them back. When she returned to Garrett and her father, she said, "Garrett, a lot of these things are very, very old. I bet you could sell them for a ton of money and use them to install water and electricity. What else do you need?" "Here? I don't know. What you see is everything I saw. The vault is locked and I don't know the combination for it. I also didn't look in any of the drawers or desks. Idea of what's here. While you and Dad are looking around and seeing what needs to be done, can I go around to the desks?" "Yes, sure." After Bill and Garrett had a quick tour of the bank, Bill said, "The old building seems to be in pretty good structural shape, but we're going to have to rip out all the wiring and plumbing. Are you sure you want to live here?" "Well, maybe not here, but in this building. There were supposed to be apartments on the top 2 floors, but Grandpa had to tear down the stairs years ago to keep children out of the apartments and prevent them from climbing onto them. And maybe I was hurt, I was hoping to live upstairs in one of the apartments." Bill walked out of the building, saying as he walked, "Well, let's take the ladder off my truck and see what's up there. I know we can at least check the 2nd floor and I think we can get there 3rd. After they set up the ladder, Bill looked at the boarded-up doors and windows. He put on a tool belt and climbed the ladder with a small pry bar. He examined the plywood covering of the door and inserted a pry bar under its edge. He carefully walked around the tree, freeing it as he went. When the bottom and part of the sides were free, he walked down the ladder a short distance, pulled the log over his head, and then climbed up the ladder below it. He gathered his courage and finished peeling away the tree, letting it fall to the ground below. Bill tried the doorknob and cursed. He looked at Garrett and said, "The damn door is locked. I don't think you have the keys to it, do you?" I'm not sure. I had a lot of old keys when the lawyer gave me the keys to the bank. Let me go inside and get them." Garrett turned the corner and entered the bank. The doors to the top of the old building were on the side facing the parking lot. He quickly returned with a large bunch of keys on an old metal ring. He looked at Bill and said, "Here, catch them," before tossing them up. Bill caught the keys on the 2nd throw and turned back to the door. He tried almost all the keys before he found the one that unlocked the door. When he tried to open the door, there was a dangerous dance as it opened. Finally he opened it and carefully climbed all the way up, then disappeared inside. Garrett immediately climbed the stairs and followed Bill to the second floor. When Garrett entered the building, he saw that they were in a small corridor. Two doors opened from the entrance, one in front, the other in the back. Bill opened the back door and tried to find the keys to the front. As Garrett approached him, the lock clicked and Bill said, "Finally. Why does the last key you try always work?" "Well, it doesn't matter, the doors are unlocked." Bill pointed to the door, said, "After you," and motioned for Garrett to go into the front apartment. The two friends walked into a dark room. They could see almost nothing because the windows were boarded up. Garrett walked to one of the side windows and tried to open it. Finally, with Bill's help and careful use of the pry bar, the window opened and they pressed the pry bar into the plywood sheathing. Finally, with a squeal, he gave in and fell to the ground. The light illuminated a partially furnished room with a sofa, an old-fashioned chair and a lamp. They returned to another room, which was the kitchen, and saw an old-fashioned stove and what looked like a gas refrigerator. There was an old wooden dining table and 4 old wooden chairs. The small bathroom opened from the kitchen door into a small bedroom. The room even had an old 3/4 size bed and a chest of drawers with a nearly useless mirror above it. "Well, on the face of it, it's not that bad," Bill said. "Let's see what the other room looks like." The two friends crossed the small hallway and entered the second apartment. Garrett and Bill opened a couple of windows again and removed the wood from them to let some light into the room. After light entered the room's windows, they discovered that it was a mirror image of another apartment. Garrett looked around and said, "I think I can live here with just a little work. We need to get some wiring and water in here, but I can live with the old-fashioned decorations for a while. I'll have to build, although I don't want to climb the stairs every time I want to go home." Bill stood looking around for a while and then said, "Yeah, it wouldn't be so bad if they cleaned everything up and put it in order. At least we're lucky here in this town and they don't have zoning rules or city building codes. We only need to worry about national and state requirements. I think we can help you with some things if you want. If you're not too picky, we can source some of the materials we need from waste. About such things, but installing a safe ladder would still be quite expensive. Yeah, I was already thinking about going through the trash cans at work for some things I might need here. We always throw away things that can still be used. However, I will still have to buy plumbing and wiring. I don't want to deal with the stairs and landing for the top floor either. I wonder if it is possible to make an internal staircase from the entrance." Bill returned to the apartment and looked around. He said, "It looks like 2 of the bedrooms are just outside the entrance. Assuming the top floor is the same, we can run up the stairs through the building and destroy 1 closet on each floor. In any case, this is not a problem for the second floor. I think I'll turn the whole floor into 1 apartment for myself. I'll turn the front into a living area and put a bedroom and family room or office in the back. Hell, I could even make it 3 bedrooms. I think there's a place there. We can keep the top floor as 2 apartments and maybe I can rent them out for some extra income." "Well, Garrett, I think it will work, but it will be quite expensive, even if you use trash and second-hand items from jobs. I will help you, but I will not cut corners or compromise safety. Again, we're lucky that this city doesn't have any zoning regulations or building inspectors to worry about. Yes, but I still want it to be done right if we do this. And thanks for offering to help, but I really can't afford to hire anyone. However, I think I want to make a bigger terrace outside for further seating. Maybe even take it around the front so you can see Main Street like you used to." "Who said anything about money here? You are my friend, and if I want to spend some of my free time helping you, I will do so. As for the deck, maybe we can do it. It depends on how much work it requires. It's about installing anchors and spacers to hold it in place. Remember, this will cost money. You will also need to do your best to preserve the original timber and fittings before we do anything. You will need to consult the government if you can. Put the building on the Register of Historic Buildings. There are grants and assistance for reconstruction. I think there are even some tax breaks. Of course, if you do list the building, you will have to at least preserve the historic facade. This may affect the placement of the balcony on the facade. If you list the building, you will have to leave the appearance as close to the original as possible. Great. I like the look of the building and I like the idea of tax breaks and grants even more. But I don't know anything about the process of applying for benefits. What about you? Some, but Doris in the office will do for that. She can help you. Let's now wire you up to the bank and figure out how to connect you to the city water, then you'll have a place to stay while we do the rest of the work. It will be slow, working part-time in the evenings. I won't work every evening or weekend either. I don't expect this from you. I can do most of the work myself anyway. I will definitely need some help with the heavy lifting and proper installation of the stairs and deck. If it's not too expensive. I think I want the deck frame to be made of steel. They entered the bank and found Katie sitting at the table reading old magazines. She looked up and said, "Garrett, I found a lot of interesting things. Look at some of these photos. I think this building is at its grand opening. There is an article there that must have been cut from a newspaper of the time. The building looks the same as it did then, except for the missing staircase and landing. Previously, there was even a balcony on the second floor." Did you say balcony? Let me see this photo, please, Garrett said with some excitement. I thought I remembered Grandpa saying there used to be a balcony overlooking the main street. Garrett took the article and photos from Kathy. He looked them over quickly and then said, "Look at this, Bill. Once upon a time there was a balcony here, the same as I described when the building was built. Will this help us?" Of course, Garrett. There must have once been anchors ahead. Let's take a closer look and see if we missed anything, Bill replied. You'll have to keep the same width as before, but at least you'll be able to get that front balcony you wanted. It appears to be as wide as the sidewalk. I think 8 feet at the most. There was no balcony on the third floor, but there was a nice roof protecting the second floor balcony and sidewalk. It was a really elaborate facade for the time. Katie waited impatiently as the two men talked about the balcony. She didn't understand what was going on, and her curiosity about the contents of the boxes in storage was paramount to her at the moment. She soon interrupted them, saying, "Garrett, I still want to see what's in some of the tables in storage. Some cashier's drawers are also locked. Do you have the keys to them? What about storage? It's also locked. Can you open it? It would be great to be inside a real bank vault." Garrett tossed her the keys and said, "Here are all the keys I have. Pass out. I have a stack of papers that the lawyer gave me. They are there on the big table. I have no idea where it might be." Katie grabbed the keys from Garrett and headed towards the locked drawers and side rooms. Taking the keys, she said, "Cool. Thank you." Garrett and Bill looked at each other and grinned, then shook their heads. Bill and Garrett went outside to take a closer look at the front of the building. As they examined it, Bill said, "Look, Garrett, there are some slightly discolored spots along the blocks. I wonder if they filled in with the mounting anchors after the balcony was removed. It seems that this is indeed the case. This is so that installing a balcony can be much easier, not to mention cheaper. This will also be a plus when you apply for historic designation. Now you don't change the building, you return it. Its original design." The two men continued to talk about the work and cost of restoring and renovating the building. Garrett agreed to hire his employer's firm to install the staircase, landing, and balcony framing because it needed to be done correctly to ensure the safety of those who might use the balcony, as well as those who might walk underneath it. Back inside, Bill and Garrett stood looking at the decor for a moment and Bill asked, "Have you thought about what you're going to do with this floor? That solid walnut paneling and trim would be absolutely beautiful if you can keep it and use it in everything you do with the bank. This location will be a great office space for small businesses." No, I didn't even think about any other use for the building other than living upstairs. I hadn't even thought about renovating apartments I don't rent out until you mentioned it. I'm not sure I want to bother with this. Rent, after you guys talked about all the problems you had with damage and late payments, I'm sure I could use the money, so I might as well. Well, if you can come up with some way to screen your tenants, that would help. The damn laws are written more to protect defaulters than landlords, and you need to be careful how you manage apartments or you'll get in trouble there, but it can be done. Katie and her mother rent to me, and it looks like we still have some late payments, but at least most of our damage is normal wear and tear, and I haven't had to evict anyone. If you go this route, maybe you can get some tips from them, or better yet, no more apartments than you have, maybe they can manage them for you. Well, that's pretty far in the future. First, I need to get everything in order. So what do you suggest to fix this mess? Damn, I don't know what should come first, water or electricity. Water, I think I can at least clean myself up and punish myself. Yes, I think you're right. Look, I don't have much to do today. I can go home and get some pipe and tools if you want to try plumbing. You can start dismantling the old plumbing while I'm gone. Anyway, we can do some of the work here, and next week you can call the city and ask for a meter and hook up to the power grid. The exterior walls of the old bank were built from 12-inch limestone blocks, so most of the plumbing and wiring was indoors rather than in the walls. It wasn't all that great aesthetically, but it made Garrett's job a lot easier. Pull out old wiring and plumbing. He carefully saved all the old pipes and wires for later recycling. Copper wire will fetch a good price and help with expenses. After he ripped out all the pipes and wires he could reach, he built wooden utility purlins when he replaced them so they no longer exposed to the street. Where possible, he laid utilities inside the inner wall. By the end of the day on Sunday, they had done all the plumbing for the downstairs toilet. In the bank, as well as in his only bathroom and kitchen in the upstairs apartment. Much of the plumbing was temporary because Garrett intended to renovate the bathrooms later and install more modern fixtures. However, he intended to leave the sinks and toilet in the same place. There won't be a lot of repeat plumbing. They even installed temporary wiring to give him some light and electricity for air conditioning and cooking. Now all he had to do was contact the electric company and the city to begin service. The next project will be to build a staircase to make it easier for him to enter his apartment rather than climb the stairs. Working with a contractor took almost a month and cost more than Garrett cared to mention. He made sure the job was completed to his satisfaction, although he helped keep costs down by sourcing used steel for the frame. He even managed to cover the deck so that it looked as close as possible to the photo Katie found. Now he had a nice place where he could sit outside and watch the world go on, if he ever found the time to do so. Much to his surprise, every now and then during the summer one or another of the people he worked with would come and help with the heavier work or the work that Garrett didn't know how to do. What's even better is that none of them allowed him to pay them for his help. He always made sure they had plenty to eat and drink. From time to time, he even held barbecues by the creek on his farm for his colleagues. They went through all the plumbing and wiring of the building, so that by the fall, all the remaining work was just cosmetic work. He even bit the bullet and remodeled the bathrooms and added new fixtures so he could hide the plumbing in them. The interior staircase from the second to the third floor took almost 2 weeks to build, but once completed, access to the top 2 apartments became much easier. To his somewhat surprise, Garrett was more than able to afford the work he was doing on the building. This was largely due to Katie. She came up with the brilliant idea of listing the things they found in the jar on eBay. It's amazing what the antiques brought. People were crazy about the old office equipment, calendars, and papers she found for sale. She even took care of the shipping and handling, leaving herself with only the extra shipping and handling fees for her efforts. So far, they have not been able to break into the locked vault. Garrett was too busy to worry too much about it, but Katie was going crazy wondering what was inside. She reluctantly agreed with Garrett that they had better things to do, but she still kept asking when he was going to open it. Finally, in late November, Garrett completed construction on 2 third-floor apartments and was ready to rent out. The old bank measured 30 by 72 feet and each floor was 2,160 square feet. A common entrance and interior staircase reduced the size of the 2 rental apartments to about 1,000 square feet each. Since they lived in a small town, he asked for $475 a month for each. To his surprise, the apartments were rented out within 2 weeks of the announcement. This gave him an income of $900 a month, which he could live on or use to improve his apartment or the bank on the first floor. Kathy and her mother agreed to act as his agent for $25 a month per apartment. None of the utilities were included in the rent, so the remainder of the rent went to Garrett's profits, except for a small amount spent on insurance and property taxes. Garrett eventually gave up trying to find the combination to the safe and called the storage company to see if they could open it. The day the representative came, it seemed like half of his friends were at the grand opening. Katie stood right behind the technician and was jumping up and down with anticipation. Finally, after nearly 30 minutes of work, the technician turned the vault handle. With a loud click, the switches disconnected and he slowly opened the door. As he continued to service the old vault, Katie ducked inside the thick walls and began exploring. Bill and some of his closest friends followed him. Just outside the vault door was a large group of safes. Some of them were locked, some were open. Further inside there was a thick steel grate, locked with a padlock. Katie pulled it open and moaned when she found it locked too. She turned and darted past the men towards the table she was using. She grabbed the keys and ran back to the storage room, where she began to sort through the keys until she found the one that unlocked the folding grill. She pushed the door open and quickly entered the room. She stopped inside and looked at the shelves. She was just standing there looking at the shelves when Bill and Garrett approached her. On the shelf were several trays filled with money of all denominations, from pennies to real silver dollars. Next were stacks of bills of various denominations. There were ones, twos, fives, tens, 20s, 50s and hundreds, although the higher the denomination, the smaller the stack of bills. Katie turned to Garrett and said, "Look at the money. I bet there are thousands of dollars in there. You can finish college and work in a bank now, no problem." Bill walked past Katie and looked at the money. He took some bills and coins, then whistled before returning them to their original place. He turned to Garrett and said, "Katie is more correct than I think, even she thinks, Garrett. As a collectible, this money is worth much more than its face value. These coins are real silver and some bills are gold and silver certificates. I didn't see a single Federal Reserve note in the lot. When the country went off the gold standard, all old gold and silver certificates had to be destroyed. There is a real gold mine right here on this shelf. You better make damn sure this vault stays locked and not even hint at what's in here, or you'll be in serious trouble." Bill turned and began leading Katie out of the vault after telling her to keep quiet about what they had found. As they passed through the room with the safe, she stopped again and said, "I wonder if there's anything in those locked drawers?" Garrett turned from locking the barred gate and said, "I don't know, Katie. I saw a board in the storage room with the keys to the drawers. We can look for them later." As he passed her, he stopped and picked up a book that was lying on the small table. He read the title on the cover, then opened the book and flipped through a few pages before speaking again. "This is a book about safe deposit boxes. It appears that the locked boxes belong either to my family or to the bank itself. The policy was that if a box was empty, it was kept open, so there was probably something in it, drawers that are locked." After they left the vault, a technician approached Garrett and said, "I have completed maintenance on the vault. I can give you the combination now, or if you want we can reset it to something else. Everything is fine. Let's leave everything as it is. Can you leave me instructions on how to reset it later if I want?" "Of course, sir. If you come with me, I will show you everything you need to know and get out of your way." After 20 minutes of discussion and training, the technician closed and locked the door, then watched as Garrett opened and locked it again. He then left for another visit and Garrett returned to the main part of the bank. There were a few people hanging around and when he appeared they made a fuss. The smug asshole acting as the mayor of a small town approached Garrett and demanded, "Well, what did you find? We all want to know what's in storage. You opened it, didn't you? I don't know why we couldn't go inside and take a look." "Yes, we opened it. All we found was old bank property and papers. I haven't had time to look through the contents, but there doesn't seem to be much interest there. The safes are mostly locked. And we haven't looked into them yet, but from the book I discovered that the locked boxes contained bank papers. All existing records show that everyone's personal papers and funds were transferred to other banks when great-great-great-grandfather locked the doors and sold the deposits." "Well, what documents did you find?" "I'm the chairman of the City Historical Society, and I need to know this so we can document the find in our city history books. I need to know some of what awaits a reporter when he gets here." Garrett glared at the little man and clenched his jaw in anger before saying, "You know everything I'm going to tell you now. What is there or not is none of your business. This is private property and the contents of the storage facility are my property and my business, and no one else's. We'll see about it. What's in this vault is part of this city's history, and it is your responsibility to keep my office, as mayor and chairman of the Historical Society, informed. Now get out of my way and let me in. The mayor tried to push Garrett away, but at the same time turned to one of his friends and motioned for her to come forward. Garrett stepped back slightly from the mayor's push, then planted his feet and stood in front of the raging man. Garrett was larger than the mayor in his youth and in much better shape. This time, when the mayor bumped into him and tried to get around him, he bounced away from Garrett. He exploded again, "Step aside, young man, or suffer the consequences." Garrett once again blocked the mayor's access to the door to the back of the bank, saying, "Katie, call the sheriff's office and ask for help, please." The small town had no local law enforcement, but relied on the county sheriff. "I'm having trouble with forced entry and someone might get hurt." After hearing Kathy talk to the dispatcher, the mayor finally gave up trying to push past Garrett. As he left the building, he exploded again and said, "You haven't heard of this yet, young man? You can either voluntarily give me access to the information you find in this repository, or I will force you to give it up. It's your decision." Apparently there was a sheriff's car parked nearby because a deputy arrived about 10 minutes later. He came to the bank and asked what the problem was. Garrett talked to him and explained the difficulty. Since the mayor had left, the deputy could not do anything about this problem. However, he agreed to find the mayor and explain to him that unless he could prove to either the city or himself that there were documents or funds in the vault, that he had no legal right to access to him. After the excitement subsided, Garrett also called his lawyer and discussed the problem with him. He was told that nothing could be done until the mayor tried to do something illegal to gain access to the bank, such as breaking and entering the bank or using other strong-arm tactics. At the end of the month, when the rest of the bills came in, Garrett had not received a water and sewer bill from the city. He paid all the bills he received at the end of the month and didn't even notice that he hadn't received a city bill. He first learned he hadn't received a bill when he found a letter on his door saying his service had been terminated due to non-payment. And indeed, when he tried to get some water, there was none. Garrett contacted his tenants and they both said they had received the bills and had already paid them. They both still had water supply. He went to the city office and was told the bills had been mailed, but he couldn't pay his, so the shutdown was correct. The city employee, who was also the mayor's wife, grinned and said, "Now, if you pay the late bill and reconnection fee, we can reconnect you in a couple of days. It will cost $21.64 for water, $10 late fee and $75 reconnection fee." What? This is nonsense. I told you I didn't receive the bill. I don't mind paying a late fee, but the reconnection fee is completely wrong. I received a shutdown notice, so if you mailed me the bill, I should have received that too. Well, sorry. Now do you want to reconnect or not? Yes. Let me write you a check. Oh, sorry, sir. Since you are past due on your bills, our policy is to accept cash only. I'm afraid I won't be able to accept your check. You're kidding. You're taking checks from other people. Well, yes, but they have a good reputation. If you keep track of your accounts and cooperate with the city, I am confident that you will soon be able to start paying by check, like more reliable people do. What do you mean, cooperate with the city? This is the first time we've had problems and you're treating me like a criminal. Well, now you know what it's like, don't you? If you get the hang of the program and become, shall we say, more open and cooperative, maybe these little problems will just, shall we say, go away? Suddenly, Garrett had an epiphany. This is all the merit of the mayor. He glanced at the clerk, turned and walked out the door, letting it slam shut. Returning home, he called his lawyer. Unfortunately, he found that he had no choice but to pay the required amounts. The lawyer said, if they have a policy of disconnecting service for non-payment of bills, and most utilities do, then they acted correctly, assuming that this policy was at one time known to you. A service that discusses penalties for non-payment or late payment of bills. You should find your contract and check, but I'm sure there is a required clause somewhere in it. I suggest you mark your calendar from now on and go to the city office before the account becomes past due to make payments until it passes. On the other hand, if you can prove that they are harassing you and did not send an invoice, you can get the reconnection fee waived. The next day, mid-morning, a sheriff's patrol car pulled up to Garrett's place of work. The sheriff's deputy inquired and was directed to Garrett. When he got there, he confirmed his identity and then said, "Yesterday, you were accused of making terroristic threats against City Clerk Stella in her office, Mr. Mance. Fortunately for you, they have no evidence of your activities and no witnesses to prevent us from putting you in jail. However, I must inform you that this threat report is in our files, and if you are accused of these actions again, you may be jailed during this time." You know what I'm talking about. You? Yes, I know, but you know as well as I do that all this is nonsense. Did you find out the details of the problem I had with the mayor, or did you just take him and his wife at their word? What do you mean? We have a complaint that you walked into City Hall and angrily demanded that utilities be restored to your home after they had to cut off your services due to non-payment of your bill. You allegedly made several threats and then broke out of the house building and damaged the door when you slammed it. You then got into your truck and spun the tires as you left, throwing rocks and gravel along with the tires into the building, damaging the paint on it. The city is in the process of preparation. Bill for the damage caused by this. Garrett started laughing when the deputy told him about the damage to his car. The deputy looked at him angrily and said, "I assure you, this is not a joke, Mr. Mance. You could have hurt someone when you did that." Finally, Garrett managed to hold back his laughter and said, "Sorry, deputy, but I find it extremely funny and completely unbelievable that my tires flipped over as I was leaving, since I live only 1 block from the city offices and my truck has been running for the past week, was in the garage. If you want, you can check it all out at your Mason Ford dealership. You can ask anyone in town, well, anyone other than the mayor and his friends, and they'll check me out. I've been walking or riding my bike for the past few days while my truck was being repaired. I strongly suspect that this is all a result of my refusal to allow the mayor into my building to look through my personal papers and vault at the old bank. Stella, he told me in the presence of witnesses that I would suffer the consequences of denying him access. We actually called your department because of his attempts to break into the building." When he heard about the previous problem with the mayor and the truck, the deputy thought for a moment before saying, "If what you say is true, there may be a problem with the mayor filing a false report. I need to take your statement and we will ask a detective to investigate this matter. I strongly advise you to maintain your distance from the mayor, city employees, and the office until we get to the bottom of this matter." After the deputy left, Garrett called his lawyer and reported the conversation. Lawyer Mr. Douglas said, "I think you should do as the MP advised and keep your distance. When you have to be around city administration and employees, I suggest you carry and use a tape recorder so they can't falsely accuse you of something again. In fact, it would be a good idea to have a witness with you and, above all, be sure to get written receipts for any funds you hand over to them in cash." That evening, on his way home from work, Garrett asked Bill, who was driving him to and from work until his truck was repaired, to stop at a local electronics store so he could buy a tape recorder that would fit in his pocket. It was a good thing, because as Garrett began to walk up the stairs to his apartment, the mayor confronted him. The mayor walked up to Garrett and growled, "Are you ready to cooperate with me now, young man, or do you need more convincing?" Of course, when he saw the mayor, Garrett turned on the tape recorder and took as non-confrontational a stance as possible, then said, "What do you mean, Mr. Mayor? What should I cooperate with and why are you here on private property approaching me? You know damn well why. I told you that if you don't give me access to the documents you found in the bank, you will suffer the consequences. I just started with you and look what it costs you. More than $100 in your account. 1 month just to have water in your home. If you continue to obstruct me, you will end up in prison and broken. All you need is a couple of bruises and a few broken windows and you'll be charged with assault in no time. At least now, when can I get to the bank? How about the 12th of never? I once told you that the documents in the vault were family and business documents and you had no right to see them. My statement still stands. Now get off my property before I call the sheriff and report you for trespassing." "Okay, asshole. Let me know when you're ready to cooperate. Everything that happens to you lie. S on your shoulders. I warned you." The mayor stomped away angrily, and Garrett wearily walked up the stairs to his home. After he sat down and had his dinner, he began to think about what the mayor had said. He decided to wander around the city and see if he could come up with anything that could help. He called several of his friends and told them about the latest confrontation. The next morning, when he got to his place of work, Garrett heard one of his friends call to him, "Hey, Garrett, come here for a minute. I have something to show you." When Garrett walked over to where his friend was sitting, he showed him a short video clip he had taken on his phone that morning. He said, "I was driving past the back door of City Hall, I live on the next block, and I saw the mayor and the meter reader talking behind the offices. The mayor seemed to have raised his head and was reading the meter. Hit him twice on the cheek. The second blow I received was when the mayor fell and crashed into the door. He broke the glass in the door and it looks like he cut himself. I guess you're not the only one. The mayor is angry now." Garrett laughed and said, "Okay. Now maybe he'll leave me alone." About an hour later, the same sheriff's deputy who had spoken with Garrett earlier arrived and approached him. This time he removed the handcuffs and said, "Garrett Mance, you are under arrest for assault and battery and criminal damage to public property. Now please turn around and keep your hands behind your back so I can handcuff you, sir." After being handcuffed, Garrett said, "What the hell does this all mean? I never harmed anyone or destroyed any property. Is this because of a conversation I had with a city employee a few days ago? I thought we took care of that. I don't know anything about the conversation with the city secretary. You are being arrested today because this morning, around 7:30 a.m., you allegedly confronted and assaulted Mayor Parker outside City Hall. Complaint. Now you have the right to remain silent." As the deputy walked away, Garrett yelled to his friend, "Hey Darren, please send this photo to my phone and to Mr. Oliver Douglas, ESQ, my attorney. I have a feeling I'm going to need it." When Garrett and the deputy arrived at the county headquarters to take him into custody, his lawyer, Mr. Douglas, was there. After completing the necessary paperwork, Garrett was allowed to meet with Mr. Douglas. The lawyer said, "Well, it looks like things are going to get worse and worse. Did you have a fight with the mayor this morning? Is there anything to this accusation?" "No, this is complete nonsense, complete fiction. When I got home last night, the mayor was waiting for me and again tried to get me to let him into the vault. I'm really starting to wonder why he's so adamant that he needs to see the contents of the vault. What is his real motive? It just can't be because he thinks there's something inside that's of interest to the historical society. Damn if he asked. It would be good if we allowed him and the public to see some historical documents, calendars, and so on. After I again refused to let him in, I ordered him to leave the area. As he left, he told me to let him know when I was ready to cooperate and that whatever happened was on my shoulders. I'm really glad I recorded the conversation like you said. You have it on tape? Great. Where is the recording? Shit, I think the sheriff has it. Today, when I was arrested, I had a voice recorder with me. I even taped some of my conversations with the deputy. Well, I guess I got almost everything today because he was working when he handcuffed me. Oh, when they called you from my place of work, did they mention the photos Darren took this morning behind City Hall? HEY, I wonder if this asshole. Yeah, I'm sure. What? Darren told me that when he came into City Hall this morning on his way to work, he saw the meter reader and the mayor talking in the alley, then the meter reader punched the mayor a couple of times and knocked him through the door. The glass broke and it looked like the mayor got cut. I bet that asshole got hurt this morning and instead of telling the truth that the counter did it, he blamed me. Darren should have told you about the video and sent it to you. Of course it will cleanse me." Mr. Douglas smiled like the shark he was when he heard this. He stood up and said, "I think I have enough for now. I need to get your record before it disappears, gets damaged or erased, and I need to find a witness to an argument this morning. You can probably be saved after a preliminary hearing, but if everything goes as I expect you to be released, I will not be surprised if your good mayor does not end up in prison in your place. The preliminary hearing will probably take place tomorrow, Thursday at the latest." The rest of the day and night felt like weeks to Garrett. He sat there, alternating between fear that he would have to stay in jail for a while and anger at the damned mayor for doing this to him. He simply, for the life of him, could not understand why this was happening. Sure, he refused to let the mayor into the vault to look through the papers stored there, but why was he so damn angry and vindictive about it? If he had asked nicely and been willing to wait a couple of days until Garrett could look at some documents, he would have let him look at them. After all, he had a good reason to ask them to meet. It is quite possible that some documents will add to knowledge about the history of the city. Garrett simply refused to give him unrestricted access, especially before he knew what exactly was there. The next morning, Garrett was taken to the courthouse for a preliminary hearing. He was embarrassed to see him shuffling down the street in a bright orange jumpsuit, with shackles on his legs and handcuffs on his wrists. He had 3 other prisoners with him, and they made quite a show as they made their way from the van to the courthouse for the hearing. Garrett's case was the first thing he was grateful for. As he was ushered into the courtroom, it seemed like everyone he knew was there. Bill, Kathy, Darren, and a couple of the other people he worked with sat and watched him shuffle, clank, and rumble down the aisle to his seat. The mayor was there too, and when he saw Garrett, he grinned widely and winked at him. He had some nasty bruises on his face and bandages on his arm and the back of his head, probably from cuts he received when he fell through the door and broke the glass. After several awkward minutes in the noisy courtroom, Garrett saw the bailiff stand and heard him say, "Rise, Honorable Judge Judy McFarland." After the judge entered the courtroom and took her seat, she invited everyone else to sit down. After everyone was seated, she struck the gavel and called the meeting to order. Then she called the first case. When she received it, she read the charges against Garrett and explained that this was a preliminary hearing to see if there was enough evidence to bring him to trial for his alleged crimes. The prosecutor stood up and presented his case first, explaining to the judge and the court how dangerous and unreasonable Garrett was. He said he has witnesses and evidence that will prove that Garrett did indeed assault the mayor of Stella on the day in question and had previously exhibited threatening behavior. He told the court about Garrett's alleged threats that day as he attempted to turn the water back on, and even described the alleged damage to City Hall due to rocks and gravel thrown at the building as Garrett allegedly drove off in anger that day. After the prosecution presented its case, Mr. Douglas stood up and began to rebut the prosecution's case. He said, "Your Honor, my client, Mr. Garrett Mance, pleads not guilty to these charges. I have evidence that will prove that my client did not actually commit any of these crimes. If the court pleases, allow me to refute these accusations." Charges in chronological order. First, the alleged threats made at City Hall to the city clerk. There is no evidence or witnesses to these threats. It's my client's word against the word of the mayor's wife, who is also the city clerk. On the day he allegedly spun his tires and threw rocks and gravel at City Hall he was walking through, his car was in a garage being renovated and had been there for a week. I have evidence of this which I would like to present as a defense exhibit. Number 1. Secondly, my client was not near City Hall on Tuesday morning for the last time when he allegedly attacked the mayor and hit him on the door, breaking the glass. I have witnesses who claim that he was with his boss on the way to his workplace for work. His truck was still in the garage, and he drove back and forth with coworkers to get to work sites. Mr. Douglas stood up and said, "I have a video taken that morning, Your Honor, which shows not Mr. Mance attacking the mayor, but Clarence Jordan, the city meter reader, punching the mayor in the face and knocking him to the ground. I don't know why the mayor decided to blame my client for this injury, but obviously he did not commit the alleged crime." Observers in the courtroom erupted in murmurs as they discussed the bomb that had just been produced. The judge tapped the pad 3 times with her gavel and said, "Quiet. Be quiet or I'll clean the room." When he heard Mr. Douglas gut the case against Garrett, the prosecutor looked sick. At the same time, Mayor Parker stood up and rushed through the gate separating the audience from the lawyers and hearing participants. He lunged at Garrett and screamed, "You're a fucking asshole. I won't let you get away with shitting on me like your family did to my great-grandfather. I know you have evidence in this bank that will clear his name. Your family stole his farm, and then he was sent to prison for robbery and murder. I know you can clear his name and then you will have to give us our farm back." When the mayor approached Garrett, he tried to hit him. Garrett raised his still cuffed wrists and blocked the blow, then watched as 2 bailiffs detained Mayor Parker. After they subdued him, the judge said, "Arrest this man for contempt of court, assault, and perjury. After I review the evidence and allegations in this case, I may find other charges that can be brought against him." The judge turned to look at Garrett and Mr. Douglas and then slammed her gavel down. She said, "I do not see any probable cause to bring Mr. Mance to trial on these charges. The case is closed." It wasn't until that afternoon that Garrett was released from prison and allowed to return home. He was exhausted both mentally and physically from the ordeal. At least now some of the mayor's actions make some sense. Well, not exactly, but at least he knew what caused the hostility and sent the mayor away. If he ever knew the name of the bank robber who tried to rob the bank and shot his great-great-grandfather, he forgot it. By the time Garrett returned home, his friends had heard the news of his release. Some of them waited for him to arrive at the house and greeted him as he stepped out of the county vehicle that delivered him to the door. An impromptu party broke out in the shadows of his house. To his surprise, he found himself relaxing as some of the fear and anger left his body as it filled up with beer and snacks he had ordered to go from the cafe 2 doors down. Just before 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Garrett received a call from the garage saying his truck was ready to go home. He and Katie drove 20 miles into town and picked him up, although they were likely over the blood alcohol limit. When they returned to his house, the small parking lot was filled with people having fun. Some of them didn't even realize Garrett was gone. Garrett never knew at what time he managed to stagger, or rather almost crawl, up the stairs to his apartment and fall into bed. He recalled telling some people he worked with that he was going to take the rest of the week off before returning to work. The work, oddly enough, came to him as pleasure more and more. He discovered that he really enjoyed working with his hands and watching buildings take shape as a result of his labor. He even enjoyed the more onerous tasks involved in remodeling and restoring some of the older homes they were hired to work on. He was especially proud of his work restoring apartments at his old bank. His own apartment was much larger than the ones he was restoring for rental purposes. The rental apartments had been restored and turned into very nice apartments, much nicer than most of the rental apartments in the small town he lived in. Now it was time to start renovating his own apartment, but he couldn't decide exactly what he wanted to do with it. Early the morning after his release from prison, Garrett staggered out of bed, well, actually, not that early, it was almost noon, and made himself some coffee. He sat on the covered balcony overlooking the main street of his hometown and drank an invigorating elixir. He decided to pack up his old Ranger FX4 and set up camp along the creek that runs through his farm. He needed the privacy and calming influence of his small plot of land before returning to his daily work. After the coffee pot was empty, Garrett gathered the food he thought he would need for his 3-day stay and loaded it all into his truck. He usually kept his fishing gear and guns in his truck so he would be ready to go. Now, as usual, he wished there was a store in the city where he could replenish his food supplies and buy some alcohol, but there was none. He made a short detour to pick up the things he needed but didn't have at home, and then hurried to his camp. Once Garrett reached his favorite campsite, he didn't linger. He decided to set up a tent using a couple of plastic tarps and then postpone the fire until later. He grabbed a beer and a chair and then sat down, listening to the sounds he loved so much. He watched the stream flow and the occasional fish swim to the surface of the water in the deep pond near which he had set up camp. In the distance there was the sound of an old square chute and a tractor as one of the neighbors harvested a small field of alfalfa hay. Sometimes a cow mooed or a rooster crowed. Garrett felt the tension leave his tense body as peace enveloped him and he absorbed the soothing sounds of the country. As dusk fell, Garrett stood up and pulled the fishing rod out of the truck. He searched the area until he caught a few grasshoppers and a couple of grubs, and then headed to the river for dinner and breakfast. The fish seemed to bite the worms better than the grasshoppers. Within 30 minutes he caught 2 nice crappie and called it a day. He left one fish on the rope for the morning, quickly cleaned the other and took it to his camp for dinner. Before the next hour had passed, Garrett had prepared a dinner of fried crappie, fried potatoes and onions, and a small can of pork and beans, ate it, and cleaned up after himself. He laid out his sleeping bag and relaxed on it, placing his hands under his head and listening to the evening sounds. All sorts of chirps, caws and other sounds were heard as wildlife roamed around. He especially enjoyed listening to the splashing of jumping fish and spring pike as night fell, enveloping the land in a relaxing darkness and silence unknown in cities, or even in the small town in which he lived. The next morning, Garrett woke up at sunrise and quickly made coffee. While the coffee boiled, he undressed and entered the very cool water to relax and swim, to wash off the rough feeling of dried sweat from the previous night's heat from his body. Garrett didn't bother getting dressed after his swim. He poured the first cup of coffee and sat by the stream, drinking it. He relaxed as he watched the mist rise from the water and glow white in the rays of the just rising sun. Birds fluttered from place to place, and rare fish splashed in the slowly flowing water. By the time the sun was fully up, Garrett had finished the pot of coffee and was ready to make breakfast. For his first meal, he fried a few slices of bacon, an egg and more potatoes and onions, deciding to save the fish for later. After breakfast was ready and the dishes were washed, Garrett put on a pair of old, ratty shorts, grabbed his fishing gear, and walked to the creek. Instead of fishing in the pond near his camp, he unfastened the chain that tied his old John boat to a tree and pulled it into the water. He returned to the small 4x8 building, unlocked it and took out a 2-horsepower outboard motor and a gallon can of gas. After attaching the motor to the boat, he returned to the barn to get padding for the boat seat and 2 oars in case of an emergency. On his last trip to the boat, he brought a cooler filled with sandwiches and drinks for the day. Garrett started the engine and slowly headed upstream. He relaxed, leaning back in his seat, and the silence of the river calmed him. Even the quiet operation of the boat engine did not bother him that much. He moved slowly upstream past beautiful old trees and the occasional cow or calf. Almost all the way he was in the shade due to the huge crowns of trees hanging over the stream. Finally, nearly 2 miles upstream from the starting point, Garrett turned off the engine and let the boat stop at the beginning of a long, deep stretch of river. As the stillness of the morning enveloped him, Garrett allowed the boat to return downstream as the slow current took over. Instead of immediately starting fishing, he reached into the refrigerator and grabbed his first beer of the day. He opened the can and sat back, taking his first long sip. He stretched out his legs and relaxed, watching the banks of the stream slowly flow by and slowly enjoying his beer. Moments later, the boat landed softly in shallow water near the shore under a century-old oak tree. Garrett left the boat there until he finished his beer, then carefully prepared his rod for the first cast of the day. When he got tired of fishing in one spot, Garrett used oars to move the boat back into the current and let it drift slowly. While the boat drifted, he continued to fish until the boat grounded again, at which point he either pushed off again or sat and fished for a while. From time to time he would stop fishing and have another beer or a sandwich and chips. He completely lost track of time. In fact, he didn't even bother to take the watch with him on the trip, much less on the excursion. It was already midday when Garrett slowly floated into view of his camp. He was at his limit on the limit of crap, so he decided to end it. He moored the boat to the gravel bar next to his camp and began carrying his things into the tent before heading out for the day. When Garrett first came ashore, he saw a familiar figure sitting in his chair, drinking a beer. About the time he saw the figure, Katie stood up from her chair and said, "Damn it, Garrett, you're bothering me. Why didn't you tell me you were coming here today? When you didn't answer your phone, I called worried that you got too drunk last night and fell off the balcony or something. I drove all the way to your house to check on you, but you weren't there. I decided to come here to see if you were here and check." "At you. How are you doing?" "I'm fine, Kat. Of course, I felt like crap yesterday morning. Yesterday I didn't even get up until almost noon. What time did the party end?" "I don't know exactly. I woke up in my truck around 4:30 and everyone was gone, so I drove home. I haven't had an injury like this in a couple of years." "Yes, me too. Of course, I'm glad that the law did not appear. Who the hell brought all the beer and snacks anyway?" "I know a couple of guys who haven't turned 21 yet and we could all get in trouble because of course, I'm glad the mayor wasn't there to force the law on us." "Oh yes. This was one of the things I wanted to tell you. This morning I heard on the radio that the mayor was taken from prison to the hospital. Garrett laughed and said, "Well, at least this time they can't blame me. Couldn't have happened to a better guy." "Was he in a lot of pain?" "They didn't say, just that he was taken to the hospital after a fight in prison. A bunch of reporters were scouring the city just before I left this morning, looking for you and harassing anyone who wanted to know what we thought about it. I just brushed them off after I said I have no idea where you are." While they talked, Kathy helped Garrett carry his belongings back to the storage unit and reattach the boat to a tree well above the floodline. They then began cleaning the fish to prepare it for frying. Garrett washed his hands after the fish was cut up and grabbed a beer. He tossed it to Katie, took one for himself, and then sat down in his chair and watched the stream flow by again. Katie pulled another chair over to him and helped him. While the friends were drinking beer, they were talking. After a few general comments, Katie looked at Garrett and asked, "So what now? Do you have a place to live and what are your plans for the future? Are you ever going to finish working on your apartment? Bank? What are you going to do on the first floor? You really need to do something with the old money and stuff in storage. I'm sure we still need to check everything. Safes too. Yes, I know. Next time I'm going to renovate my apartment, but I don't have the money for it right now and I want to do it right. I need a really good place, but comfortable. I think I'll see if I can find someone who knows about old money and see if it's for a collector or something. Garrett, I'm sure the collector will want it. All that remains is to figure out how to sell it and get the best price for it. I think you need to call a few auction houses in the big city that do things like this and maybe some big dealers to see what they think is the best way to sell the money. Yes, I guess you're right. I think I'll go back early Sunday morning and start looking through the boxes, and then one day next week I'll see if I can find someone to tell me about bills and coins. Can I help with the boxes, Garrett? I'd really like to see what's in them. And maybe while you're working, I could call around and look online for someone to see if I can find someone to help you with money. I don't care if you come when I open the boxes. And it would help me a lot if you could find someone who could give us information about the money. Great. Now, how about I make us dinner before we get too drunk to make it? Kathy and Garrett had another very enjoyable dinner. She wouldn't let him help cook or clean, so he would sit and visit her while she did the work. Of course, during the conversation they continued to drink and drank with their food. After eating, Katie felt a little unsteady, as did Garrett. They were at that stage where everything was funny and they giggled at the most ridiculous things. Katie nearly fell when she tried to sit in the chair next to Garrett. She regained her balance and looked around, then said, "I don't think I can go home right now, Garrett. Do you mind if I crash here?" "No, but I don't have anything for you to sleep on except part of my sleeping bag. It's warm enough that I never use it to cover myself up or sleep in my clothes." Katie giggled and said, "I don't care. Just don't tell anyone that you slept with me. Deal with." Garrett stood up, finished the last can of beer and staggered off into the darkness. Katie heard the stream of his urine splash onto the ground and stood up, staggering towards the darkness on the other side of the camp, where she performed the same task. Garrett was already lying on the edge of the bed when she returned to the firelight. Katie climbed onto the bed and lay down. "Good night, Garrett," she said. "Yes, good night," he replied. They both fell into an alcohol-induced sleep almost immediately. Garrett woke up during the night to take care of his personal needs. Returning to camp, he added more wood to the fire to keep it burning. As she slept, Katie's shirt shifted, and in the dim firelight and moonlight, Garrett noticed her bare skin. He paused for a moment, thinking about how beautiful she was. He realized that Katie's beauty was not just physical, this was also in her character. The next morning, Garrett woke up to find himself next to Katie, his arm resting on her torso. He quickly realized the situation and carefully removed his hand, trying not to disturb her. As he stood up, Katie rolled over and looked at him with a smile. She didn't seem bothered and said, "Where are you going so quietly? You look like you're trying to sneak away." I didn't mean to wake you. I decided to make some coffee," Garrett replied. Katie teased him lightly, "You don't look guilty about where your hand was, do you?" Garrett quickly apologized, explaining that he didn't mean to do anything illegal. He was worried about how Katie would react, expecting her to be upset. To his surprise, Katie laughed it off and reassured him, "It's not a problem. It was I who came over to your side. You didn't do anything wrong. Now stop feeling guilty and let's enjoy this day." Katie, noticing his shock at her reaction, added, "Garrett, not all women react the same way. I know you didn't mean anything by it. You were asleep, right?" "Yeah, I would never take advantage of you, Katie," Garrett assured her. Katie smiled and stood up to do her morning chores, offering to make Garrett the coffee. When she left, Garrett couldn't help but admire her. After coffee and breakfast, Garrett and Katie decided to cool off in the creek. Garrett was initially surprised when Katie joined him without a swimsuit, but she assured him that she trusted him to be a gentleman. After spending some time in the water, Garrett came out and left Katie with his towel. When he turned to look at her, she had already wrapped herself in a towel and playfully told him to continue working at their camp. Katie changed into dry clothes and the two friends finished packing. They then drove back to town, where they packed up their belongings and drank a glass of iced tea before heading to the bank vault. Katie was excited when Garrett opened the vault, eager to explore what was inside. Garrett walked over to the row of safes and inserted the keys into the corresponding holes in the first drawer he was about to open. He felt movement and then pressure on his left side as Katie moved closer to him so she could watch him unlock the door and pull the box out of the slot in the bank vault. "Well, open it," she exclaimed. Garrett sighed and moved the box until he could lift the lid and look inside. Katie leaned closer, her head almost touching his as they both tried to see what was inside. The box was filled with papers, but they couldn't tell what they were without taking them out. Finally, Garrett gently pushed her away and said, "Come on, Katie, give me some space. Let's take this box to the main part of the bank and walk through it at the table." As soon as they sat down, Garrett began pulling papers out of the box, handing them to Katie one by one. She placed them on the table and began to read the top one, while Garrett did the same with the next one. They took turns going through the stack until they had gone through all the papers. Katie collapsed into her chair, a little disappointed. "Well, it wasn't very interesting. It was just a bunch of old ledger pages. Why do you think they kept them? I thought there might be something more interesting." Garrett nodded thoughtfully. "They may seem unimportant now, but they were there at one time. These are records of the loans people received from the bank, how much they borrowed and each payment made. They probably had to store them for a while in case someone needed them. The pages I saw showed that the loans were repaid, so most likely these are just historical records. They show due dates, actual payment dates, any late fees, and also have columns for principal, interest, and balance. Katie perked up a little. "Have you seen any old businesses that were once in town?" "I saw one for an old feed store where they financed an addition to the building, and another where they financed grain purchases 1 year. I bet the Historical Society would do it. I'd like to have some of this." "Maybe. But before we dig into another box, let's approach this methodically. I want to find the paper and make an inventory list of what's in each box in case I need to find something later." Katie glanced at the books in the storage room. "Didn't you say that some of these books have information about the contents of the boxes?" "Sort of," Garrett replied. One book showed who rented the boxes and had their signatures every time they opened one of them. I think they were similar to early versions of today's signature cards. Some books listed a bank as the user, but did not have detailed inventories. I noticed different signatures depending on who opened the box. I want to make a more detailed list of everything before we continue. The listing for this box only shows the code and number. Wait, let me see. PDLN 1936 foot for this box. These loans were repaid in 1936, so that is what the code should mean. I think I will list here the names of the people or businesses that repaid the loans. Katie grabbed the book from the table and turned another page. Look here, Garrett. Box 19 has the code BDS 36 to 45 and box 17 has the code STKCRTs but no numbers. Let's check them out. Garrett chuckled. Let's stick to the plan, Katie. We will go in order so that everything ING is neat. Okay, but hurry up. The two friends returned to the vault, replaced the key to box 1, and grabbed the key to box 2. They spent the rest of the day opening and describing the boxes reserved for bank use. Many of them contained old transaction records, but to their surprise, 2 of the boxes contained gold, one was filled with coins, the other with small gold bars and a few silver bars. Finally, they reached box 17. When they opened it, the code made sense. Inside were several ornate stock certificates. Some were owned by still operating companies, such as Union Pacific Railroad with 300 shares, Ford Motor Company with 200 shares, and John Deere with 200 shares. There were also certificates from companies that none of them recognized. One certificate in particular stood out: 100 shares of Computing Tabulator Recording Company stock, issued in 1911. Garrett and Kathy carefully listed each company and number of shares before replacing the certificates and moving on to the next box. To their disappointment, Box 18 was empty, as were several others intended for banking use. Box 19 was opened and turned out to be full of a very rare duck. It was filled with bearer bonds, bonds payable to the bearer, and/or a coupon for payment. No record of the owner of the recording survives. They once again wrote down the company name, face value, issue and maturity date of the bonds and locked the box again. Finally, the last drawer, which was still locked, was opened and inventoried. The two friends put the last key back, left the books and inventories on the bookshelf in the vault, and closed and locked it. They left the bank, locked the door, and returned to Garrett's apartment, where they each grabbed a glass of iced tea and walked out onto his balcony to watch evening fall over the small town. They waved to random cars that drove by, sometimes shouting to a friend. Around 20:30. Katie stood up and said, "Well, I think I better go home, Garrett. Thank you for letting me stay at your camp on Friday and Saturday, and even more for letting me help you look around the vault. I had a lot of fun. When are you going to check stocks and bonds to see what they're worth? Garrett, you might be really rich here. What if some of these companies, besides Ford, Deere, and railroads, are still in business? So happy for you. What are you going to do with all the money you have there? I don't know what to think right now, Katie. I need to talk to Mr. Douglas and we need to find out what things are worth before I think much about it. I just hope Mom doesn't end up in any worse place than she already is if she hears about this." The next day everyone went to their work. After Katie became engrossed in her work, she did some research on what they found in the bank and put some effort into finding someone knowledgeable about coins and old currency. At noon, Garrett called Mr. Douglas so they could discuss his findings. Douglas was not available, so Garrett asked him to call him back in the evening if possible. Mr. Douglas called Garrett around 9 p.m. that evening. When he found out what Garrett wanted to discuss, he was both excited and concerned. He said, "Are you telling me that there was all this money and certificates in the vault all this time?" "Yes. As far as I know, it hasn't been opened since great-grandfather locked it up and closed the bank. It definitely hasn't been opened in the last few years. It's just amazing. Well, I really need to know a few things. You said that my grandfather left me the bank building and all its contents, but you also said that the bank accounts had to be verified and the brokerage accounts were opened for TOD. All this means for the stocks and bonds we found in the vault, assuming they're still worth something. What about cash? Is it considered a bank account because it was in the bank, or is it mine because it was in my bank vault? And were there any contents of the bank? You said that the bank and its contents were transferred to me under the TOD deed. Well, as I understand it, you own everything in the bank, cash, stocks and bonds, because they were in the bank as contents when you took ownership. We will need to document the fact that the shares were in the bank and then change them to your name. Bearer bonds are certainly not a problem. I think we need to get an accurate valuation of everything as soon as possible, including the valuation of currency and coins as well as bullion. I can't stress enough how important it is for no one to know what's in that old vault. If rumors ever get out, there is a real possibility that it will be hacked and lost. I'm sure this is an old storage facility. Not as reliable as more modern ones. A good safe cracker could get into it pretty quickly. I think it would be a good idea to get valuables and bearer bonds out of storage and deposit them with a broker. Tomorrow, as soon as possible, I will begin research to find people who can properly assess the contents of the vault and help you better protect it. The rest of the week went more normally than the previous 2 or 3 weeks. Garrett went to work, then returned home and did some work in his apartment. He even began removing trash and rubbish from the bank, sorting it for value. He was going to throw a lot of it away until Katie jumped on his shit. She said that these were all old things and that there would probably be some fool who would pay good money for them. She took charge of the junk, as Garrett called it, and began trying to sell it, since she had some of the bank's previous contents. One day he was talking to Kathy about her search for coins for a coin dealer. On Tuesday of the following week, Garrett received a call from Mr. Douglas. After the usual pleasantries, Mr. Douglas said, "Garrett, I've made several calls over the past week, and my assistants have made even more. We found 3 brokers and 1 auction house interested in currency, coins and bullion in your store. I also found a stockbroker who is willing to research your stock and bond certificates to determine their value. The stockbroker will do the research for free if you agree to open an account with him and deposit all valuable certificates into it." This. Great. I'm more than willing to do this. What about money and bullion? How do we deal with this? Well, it's a little more complicated. The auction house and 2 dealers will agree to send someone to your storage facility to appraise the items. Another dealer insists that you bring items to them for appraisal. If we are unable to reach a decision on one of these assessments, we may arrange to send the items to a 3rd assessor. The bullion will need to be sent to someone handling it if the graders do not want to process it. This. Sounds good. When will we do this? You can more or less tell the time yourself. You will have to be present during the assessment, and I recommend that you also have a witness or 2. I can send one of my employees if you want. In fact, I highly recommend that you allow me to do this. We must make copies of the certificates before you send them to the stockbroker, and we must receive photographs of the coins and currency, as well as written receipts for all items in the vault as they are delivered to the vault. Various dealers and/or auction houses. Fine. We can do it your way. I can leave work almost any day if you give me a few days' notice. Do you want to make appointments or should I do that? Also, will all the appraisers be there on site? At the same time? I can take care of setting up appointments for you. I don't think it would be a good idea to have all the businesses there at the same time. I suggest letting one look at the items one week and then the others. If possible in the following weeks. Okay, do it, Mr. Douglas. 2 weeks after that conversation, the first appraiser arrived. They reached the bank around 8:30 a.m. Wednesday and, after a few quick pleasantries, asked if they could get to work. The team consisted of 3 people, the chief appraiser, a clerk and a photographer. Garrett and Elizabeth Prevost, Mr. Douglas's legal assistant, were also there. Around 10 o'clock in the morning, Katie appeared. When the appraiser first walked into the vault and saw the stacks of currency and coins, he stopped and stared. He licked his lips, turned to his photographer and said, "Take a picture of the racks before we start work, and then be sure to take good, clear pictures of every bill and coin as it works, obverse and reverse." The appraiser turned to Garrett and said, "I'm afraid we won't finish this today. There's a lot more here than I expected. Do you happen to have internet access here? Also, should we work here or can we move things into the main part of the building? We can work where you think it will be better. I have Wi-Fi if you need to get online. The network name is Boss and the password is Gramps 2015. The team immediately got to work, with Elizabeth overseeing their work and Garrett and Katie running errands and moving items in and out of storage while they worked on them. Around noon, Garrett suggested they run to the cafe and bring lunch, or they could lock up and go downstairs for a more leisurely lunch. The group leader decided to have Garrett bring them lunch. In fact, they only completed their work around 11 p.m. As they left, the appraiser said, "We should complete the formal appraisal by the end of next week, sir. We will mail you a copy and a bid if you would like us to purchase the collection. We will also make an offer, act as your agent if you wish to make a partial sale through our firm." The following Tuesday, the auction house arrived and followed much the same procedure as the coin dealer to evaluate them. They also had to mail in their estimate of the value and offer to put the collection up for auction at some point in the future. The third group of appraisers arrived a week after the auction house. When they saw the amount of currency and coins, they refused to evaluate it on site, and Garrett would not allow them to move it, so they returned without inspecting the materials in the vault. Garrett was still waiting for the stockbroker to call with the value of his stocks and bonds when the second appraiser left. So many stock certificates belonged to companies no one had ever heard of that he didn't expect much from it, but the broker and his lawyer thought the research was a good idea. Of course, they knew that some of the certifications were probably good since the companies were still well known. For example, there were 3, Ford, Union Pacific, and John Deere. Even if no other certificates were worth anything, Garrett had enough money to fully pay for the renovation of his building, and some more money if he decided to sell his certificates. Late Thursday night, after the last appraiser had left, Garrett received a call from his stockbroker. This time the broker looked different when he started talking. He seemed more caring or helpful. Garrett really couldn't understand it, but the whole tone of the conversation was different at the very beginning. After the pleasantries were over, the broker said, "Garrett, I really don't know where to start this conversation. First, let me say that you are a very rich man. As we expected, some of the stock certificates we received from you were worthless. The companies either went bankrupt or otherwise ceased to exist. This accounted for almost half of the certificates. As you may recall, many stock certificates were issued by very well-known and still operating companies. The hardest part was accounting for stock splits and even some reverse splits. One of the certificates changed its name in 1924 and became very famous. There have been many stock splits and price increases over the years. This certificate alone is now worth more than $500,000. You own 3,750 shares of IBM stock. Shares closed today at $170 for a value of $637,500. Your shares of Ford, Union Pacific and Deere are worth another $65,000. There were 6 other companies worth a further $297,000. The bonds you submitted that still had value amounted to another $943,176, including par value and outstanding coupons. If we can collect everything for you, we will have just over $1,942,000 to place in your account. Of course, all the bonds have matured and we are trying to collect the funds owed. This may take some time due to their age. On the other hand, the shares are allocated to your account and you can sell them at your leisure or continue to hold them. We're still trying to figure out what happened to the dividends that would normally be paid on dividend-paying stocks. We will keep you updated on our search." Garrett sat in complete shock. He had no idea what to say or do. He couldn't even imagine such a sum of money. Hell, he didn't have to work at all if he didn't want to. Wait, Grandpa really didn't work much while he knew him, but he always seemed to have enough money, and then some. Yes, of course, he worked on his small 180-acre farm, but it, of course, did not bring him much money. Garrett said, "I bet I know where the dividends went. My grandfather gave these certificates to me when he died. He never seemed to work much, but he always had everything he needed. I suspect we will find that he received dividends from warehouse. His name was Jerome Mance, his address was RR1 Box 174, in the same city as me. Okay, this gives us a chance to get started. We have a copy of the will and the documents needed to prove it and your estate, so it should be fairly easy to verify. Let me know if I can be of any assistance, Mr. Goodnight." Garrett sat on the balcony and looked at the main street of the city. The streetlights flickered and came on as darkness fell. All he could think about was his recent conversation with the stockbroker. Hell, he'd gone from having no place to live to a big apartment in a neat old building and thinking he was on the easy street. Now he finds out that he has literally millions of dollars, and that he can live in a very nice house if he wants, and he probably won't have to work a day for the rest of his life unless he wants to. Damn, what the hell? Eventually Garrett got sleepy in his but hurt from sitting on the poorly padded lounge chair, so he got up and trudged into his house to go to bed. Despite all his fatigue, he found it difficult to fall asleep. His mind kept playing the what-if game. He spent his millions again and again in his head and tried to decide what to do. In the end, he decided to just keep doing what he was doing until he found something he really wanted to do. It worked out for Grandpa after all, didn't it? He decided that he would make his apartment the most comfortable place to live he could ever dream of, and he planned to restore the bank to its former glory and then either rent it out as an office or use it as an office himself. Both appraisers finally arrived at an estimated value for the currency, coins and bullion. The dealer estimated the value at only $970,000 and offered to buy the collection outright for $750,000. The auction house estimated the auction value of the currency and coins at $900,000, and the bullion value at about $300,000. Their sales commission was a flat 18% of the item's value if Garrett decided to allow them to auction the collection. Garrett didn't need the funds immediately, so he decided to let the auction house sell the currency, coins and bullion. If it had sold at appraised value, it would have fetched about $984,000, which was significantly more than the dealer was offering. He decided to take a risk. The auction house sent an armored vehicle for funds. It took almost a full day to re-inventory the collection and prepare a receipt for Garrett. At this time, several residents of the city stopped at the bank, trying to see what was happening. When someone got too close to the armored car, the guards politely but firmly shooed them away. By the time the truck was loaded and driven away, rumors had already spread. When Garrett entered the cafe for dinner, he was almost surrounded by a crowd of people asking questions about what was happening. All he could say was, "I found some of my great-grandfather's things that I needed to put into storage. My insurance company wanted extra security." Garrett went back to his normal routine, working the same job, driving the same old Ranger pickup, wearing the same clothes and eating the same things. Quite quickly the interest faded and life went on as before. Garrett ate at the cafe a few more times, but it didn't make much difference. After all, several single residents of the city and a few married men ate there at least once a day. While visiting a cafe, Garrett began flirting with Sarah, a waitress about 2 years younger than him. Finally, he managed to convince her to go on a date with him. Garrett and Sarah went out on Friday night and watched a movie, then went back to his house for a nightcap. The cafe was just closing when he and Sarah walked up the stairs. Some of her friends saw them and made the obligatory off-the-wall comments. Around 1 a.m., Garrett drove Sarah home. He was somewhat upset, but not very surprised. Sarah had a reputation as a badass and she lived up to that reputation damn well. He had a bare chest and a wet finger, but that's all. Frustration aside, it was obvious that they really didn't have much in common. Garrett wrote that date down as a loss and decided to move on. On Saturday morning, around 8:45, a still tired Garrett went into a cafe for coffee, breakfast, and gossip. There was the usual crew there, a group of local farmers and some other residents, relaxing because it was the weekend or because they needed a break. Garrett saw Bill, Kathy and Sally, Bill's wife and Kathy's mother, sitting at their usual table. He walked over and sat down as he usually did when they were there before him. Katie looked at him intently and said nothing when Bill and Sally wished him good morning. Garrett said, "Good morning. Looks like we're in for another hot morning. Of course, I'm glad we're not working today. I'm not sure I can stand this for long." Katie pursed her lips and looked at Garrett, then spat, "Well, maybe if you didn't lay around until the morning, you wouldn't be so tired." Garrett just looked at her and shook his head, then went back to talking to Bill. Sarah walked over to the table, put her hand on Garrett's shoulder and said, "Good morning, Garrett. I really enjoyed last night. Coffee and what else?" Katie snorted and muttered, "Yeah, I bet you really enjoyed that, slut." Sally looked shocked and turned to Katie. She asked, "What did you just say, young lady?" Katie looked unrepentant and said, "You heard me. Now can we just leave it at that? You know what? I think I've had enough. I'll walk home." She loudly pushed back her chair and quickly walked out of the cafe. As she let the door close, she wiped her face with her hand as if she were wiping a tear from it. Garrett looked at Bill and asked, "What does this all mean?" Bill and Sally looked at each other before he sighed and said, "Garrett, if I had to tell you, you're not nearly as smart as I thought you were." Garrett looked at Sally, who was looking at him. He shrugged and took a sip of his coffee and then said, "Well, I guess I'm not as smart as you thought. I really have no idea why she's in such a mood today." His face turned red and muttered, "Oh. It's a woman's business, right?" Sally frowned and then said, "Damn men. If you hurt a woman's feelings, all you can think about is that it must be that time of the month or something. Damn it, Garrett, just think about what you did recently that you shouldn't have done. Maybe something will come to you." Sally looked at Bill and said, "I'm done." "And you?" Bill nodded his head and stood up. Sally headed for the door while Bill sorted out the tip for Sarah. He looked at Bill and shook his head and then said, "Well, maybe it will go away, but I think you really screwed up, Garrett. I guess I'll see you at work on Monday." Garrett shrugged and continued eating. He was leaning back in his chair, sipping his coffee and chiming in on the conversation going on around him when a couple of his younger friends walked into the cafe. Pete and Trevor grinned when they saw Garrett and walked over to his desk. They sat down on chairs and Pete said, "How was the date, man? Did you get anything or did you shrug it off like the rest of us? Someone as cute as Katie hanging on to you? Man, it's like throwing away a perfect rib for a piece of skin. When did you and Kat break up?" "What? Katie and I didn't break up." "Damn, you know we were only friends. And you know it's better not to talk about such a date." "Her house." Pete and Trevor laughed and then Trevor said, "Yeah. He took a hit like we all do. Now let's get back here. Why were you all asking about Katie?" "She acted very strange this morning and went home when I came in." "Do you all know what's wrong with her?" Trevor said, "Okay, let me see. You and Katie had been hanging out together for months. All this time she was at your house more than at home. You ask Sarah out and Katie gets mad and you don't know what's going on? God, are you stupid, or what? Dude, you were just pissed off at that girl's punch. You're lucky she didn't cut off your balls for what you did. But we were friends. She helped me put the apartment in order and sort out my grandfather's old things. That's all. Yes, okay. I think that's why she turned all of us down when we asked her out ever since she started hanging out with you. She's just a friend, but she's not interested in men anymore? Dude, I bet it sucks to be her right now." Pete and Trevor began talking to the other men in the cafe, while Garrett simply sat there, ignoring the ongoing conversation and replaying the strange events of the morning in his head. These things brought his thoughts back to the last few weeks he had spent with Katie. Hell, maybe there was something there after all. She seemed terribly interested in his happiness and helping him. When she was near him, she touched him. She always smiled and greeted him warmly. She regularly brought him coffee, tea, or something else, on the spur of the moment. Shit, was he completely blind here? If Katie really liked him as more than a friend, then what about him? What did he feel for her? He felt like crap right now, thinking about hurting Katie. How did he feel about her? He definitely liked it, and it was built like the proverbial brick shirt. She was definitely sweeter and prettier than Sarah, as well as more mature. Damn. A very confused Garrett looked away from the table and stood up. Pushing his chair back, he walked up to the cash register to pay for breakfast and coffee. While Betty Jean, the cafe owner, was making change, Sarah walked up and put her arm around his waist. She smiled and said, "So what are you going to do today, Garrett?" "Not sure. I need to do some renovations, but first I need to buy some materials. Probably go to the city for this. I leave at 2. Eh? Oh, that's great, then you'll have most of the day to relax. Well, see you later." Garrett left the cafe and didn't even notice the shocked expression on Sarah's face. Betty Jean had to quickly turn away to avoid seeing the smile blooming on her face. Apparently the date didn't go very well from Garrett's point of view. Judging by the way Sarah had been gushing all morning, the staff had the opposite impression. Garrett was preoccupied. Katie almost ran out of the cafe when Garrett was sitting with her. Yes. The boy was in a world of hurt. Now 2 women were angry with him. Garrett got in his truck and drove to Neosho, where he visited the friendly people at Lowe's. They were more than happy to sell him the materials he needed to start work on the first floor of the bank. He hadn't yet decided what exactly he wanted to do with his second-floor apartment, so he decided to work on the first floor while he thought about it. For some reason, business slowed this summer at the construction company where Garrett worked. On Friday, 3 weeks after his date with Sarah, as Bill was handing out checks to his team, he told them, "Sorry guys, but we're going to have to fire some people. We're going back to 3 teams out of 4, so the last 6 people hired must be let go." He looked at Garrett and said, "Garrett, I'm afraid you're one of them, and Jorge is the other. Each of your envelopes contains an extra week's salary to help you get by. If you're wondering when things pick up, you'll both be hired again. Sorry guys." Luckily, the layoff didn't bother Garrett too much because of his inheritance and rental income. He felt sorry for Jorge. He was Catholic and Hispanic. Like many married Latino Catholics, he and his wife had a large family. It will be difficult for them. On Saturday morning, Garrett was sitting on the balcony enjoying the morning when an unwanted guest came to him. He saw his mother arrive, and instead of going to the cafe, a place where she wouldn't normally be found dead because it was a low-class establishment, she walked up the stairs. Garrett was trying to decide how to conduct the visit when he heard the door open and his mother walking around his apartment. This angered him for several reasons. Family members in the area usually just walked into a relative's house without knocking, and even some close friends did the same. For some reason, his mother doing this after the way she treated him made him angry. Garrett was about to get up and go inside to see what his mother was doing when she walked out of his door and onto the balcony next to him. She stood looking at him and then said, "Well, it's a shack, of course. I've heard you've renovated apartments and are trying to rent them out, but if your apartment is any indication, your tenants are probably scraping the bottom of the barrel. I've seen barns that looked better." "Good morning, Mom. What brings you to my humble abode this morning? And thanks for criticizing my house. Don't pack your shorts. We still haven't received the rent you owe your sister and we need the money. I was hoping to get something from you today. Sorry, everything is out of order. Yesterday I was fired. Although I think the money was paid. If I remember correctly, the lawyer said he would deposit the fair value of the rent into B's trust fund. Have you checked with him?" No. You owe this money to us, not her trust fund, and I want it. So, how much can you give me today?" "Nothing. I'll call Mr. Douglas on Monday and check." His mother looked at him and said, "Oh, don't worry. I'm sure he'll tell you to let him handle it, and we both know what that entails. We'll just get by without it." His mother stomped away and went down the stairs. She squealed her tires as she drove away. Garrett is back in shape. He had money, but no job. The fish were biting, what could the guy do? Damn right. He went fishing. He went on a hike. He was sitting on his balcony. He went to a cafe and talked with his friends. From time to time he even saw Katie, but other than good morning or hello they did not speak. Summer is over and autumn has arrived. Having nothing else to do, Garrett went back to college and attended classes part-time. He could most often be found in the students' union playing cards or pool, but he took enough classes and studied enough to earn what was once called a gentleman's C. On New Year's Day, Garrett, as usual, went to a cafe to drink coffee. This time the discussion was loud and serious. There was a party at the house of one of the property owners that Kathy and her mother managed. It looks like the property owner's son was determined to get something from Katie that she didn't want to give him. She pushed him away and tried to run away. In anger, he hit her several times. Some of the other guests heard the screams coming from the closed room and broke down the door in time to prevent Katie from getting worse than she already was. Katie was in the hospital and the idiot who beat her was in jail. Instead of laughing with the rest of the men when she was told that she had kicked the asshole in the balls, Garrett felt himself seething with anger. After breakfast, Garrett got into his truck and drove to the hospital. On the way, he stopped at Walmart and bought flowers and a funny card for Katie. He reached the hospital and entered the room to find Katie lying on the bed and her mother sitting in a chair next to the bed, reading. Sally looked up as Garrett entered the room. Her eyes widened, then she grinned and stood up from her chair. She said, "I'll just go to the cafeteria for coffee." Katie saw Garrett as she turned to watch her mother leave. Her face was a mess. She was badly bruised and gasped as she tried to roll towards Garrett. She said, "Garrett, what are you doing here? I heard you were hurt and wanted to check on you." He placed the flowers on her small table and then walked over to her. He took her hand after she accepted the card and said, "Katie, I'm so sorry. I just didn't know how to fix it. I missed you so much and now I have you damaged." "What the hell are you talking about, Garrett? How do you think you hurt me?" "Well, if I hadn't been such an ignorant fool, you might not have gone to that party with that idiot. You know this isn't the first time he's done something like this. His dear daddy had pushed him away before, as if he'd probably do it this time. If he goes again, I'll make that bastard pay." Katie tried to laugh, but instead she stopped abruptly and winced in pain. She said, "Garrett, you're an asshole. I guess I should have said something too, but I thought we had an understanding and when you went on a date, I just couldn't deal with it. Kat, I never thought. She flirted with me like all the other guys and I asked her out like so many of them do. Damn, I don't know why I kept going. It was something like I guess it was a game. She turned me down a couple of times and I kept flirting with her, but she's easy, Katie. Hell, even before you got upset, I decided it was one shot and I was done. Something with Sarah. She flirts happily, but has nothing on her mind. I kept thinking how much I wished I could have been with you that night. In my defense, I never realized that you thought we were anything other than friends, and I didn't want to. To ruin it, I did it. There were tears in Katie's eyes. Her voice broke as she reached for Garrett again. She said, I've only been on 2 dates since you, and they were with different guys. They just couldn't compare to you, Garrett. When I was with them, I kept thinking about how much fun we would have if it were you instead of them, but I didn't know how to fix it. Well, it's all settled now, Kat. Can we remain friends and maybe go on a date too? I want to be with you more and… Katie interrupted him, saying, You're an idiot. What do you think we were doing? We spent time on your balcony. We went to the city together. We swam, camped, and fished together. There were only 2 of us. What dates are these? Yes, I think they are. But I didn't know. Katie smiled and said, Well, now you know. Fine. Garrett heard a noise and turned to see Sally standing in the door, smiling. She said, Well, I guess it's true. This is truly an evil wind that blows for no good. I'm glad to see you two together again. Let's see if you can stay there. Garrett, if you're going to be here for a while, can I go home and clean up? I'll be back in about an hour or 2. Yes, everything is fine. I'll look after her for a while. After Sally left, Garrett sat in her chair and began talking to Katie. They talked about all the personal events and then addressed the other elephant in the room. She said, Garrett, I'm so sorry your dad had to fire you. Have you found a job yet? No, I wasn't actually looking. I moved on and went back to college. I take business courses as well as some construction and project management courses. I really like working with my hands, but I still don't know what to do. I want to enroll when I finish. With the exception of the guard, I want to stay there for at least 20 years. I was promoted to sergeant last month and the captain is trying to get me to go to officer candidate school, OCS, when I graduate. After this I only have 1 year left. He says I changed my ways and he thinks I'll make a good officer. Do you like the guard so much? What if they call you again? Instead of becoming an officer, did you think about staying in construction? Or maybe you could buy and rent out a property, or both. You know that I have real estate license so I can work in my mom's office and I see so many houses in other buildings that are worth the money. Every once in a while, you can buy a house, renovate it, and then resell it. Yeah, I suppose I could get into construction or rentals, but I don't know if I want to do that. It's a pity that many houses in the city are still empty. Some of them have not been repaired for a long time, I'm afraid, and if they were in good condition, they would not sell for a large price. I'm afraid the old city is dead and just doesn't know it. It's too far to work in a residential area, and there's nothing there local, so that people live there. They all move to where there is a job, or when they get old, they move to the city to be near family or a medical facility. I really think I'll go to OCS and stay in the guard. I can continue to work part-time, guard, and live normally. My grandfather left me enough to survive. Is that all you want? To survive? I can live with the guardians if that's what you really want, but we need something more. You know, even if you didn't do anything in our city, you could do it somewhere else. I'll think about it, Kat. I enjoy tinkering with renovations and construction, and could set my own hours if I only worked on my own projects. I kind of like it. After Katie left the hospital, she and Garrett became an established couple. They were inseparable, as in the past, before his ill-advised date with Sarah. 3 months later, Katie's attacker, Jeffrey Goddard, appeared in court. This time, Dad's money didn't get rid of him completely, but it helped. He was sentenced to 3 months in prison and forced to go to a detox to dry out. Neither Katie nor Garrett were entirely happy with the verdict, but at least he was convicted this time. On April 1st, Katie arrived at Garrett's house around her usual time right after she got home from work and jumped over the balcony to plop down in his lap. After their greeting kiss, she said, "Garrett, I heard a cool rumor." "Damn, this is more than a rumor. You know, about a month ago, the White Oak Cabinet store burned down in Neosho? Well, they just signed a contract to buy the old Eagle pitcher plant on the hill here in town. They're going to outfit it and build cabinets there. They will move all their production here. They currently have 43 employees and plan to hire at least 7 to 10 more people. Some of the employees lived in company-owned apartments that were so badly damaged in the fire that they were condemned. I bet we could rent some of these houses here in town if we had some ready to go." "Sounds good, but we don't have houses, and I'm willing to bet these people already have another rented house." "Well, yes, I'm sure they are, but they won't want to drive 22 miles each way every workday when they can drive a mile or even walk to work in good weather. I really think you should buy those 4 houses that we've been talking about here in town and get them renovated quickly so they can be rented out." "I don't know. I suppose it wouldn't hurt to think about it. So what do you want to do today?" "Go look at the houses again. Except for this. How about we go into town for a bit and get some pizza?" As they ate the pizza, Katie Winston said, "This place used to be very good. Heck, I can make better pizza than they served the last few times I was here. Also went to the potty. Yes, you are right. The pizza you make is amazing. We should have just stayed home and made pizza there." "Well, that wouldn't work. I know we don't have the ingredients, and I'm sure you don't either." "No, you're right. Well, if you're done, let's move on down the road. I have one more stop to make before we get home." They got into Garrett's old Ranger and drove to the mall. They walked most of the distance through the mall, and then Garrett took Katie to a jewelry store. An employee approached them and asked if she could help them. Garrett said, "Yes. I'm Garrett Mance. They sized the ring for me." "Of course, sir. Let me check if it's ready." After the woman left, Katie turned to Garrett and said, "Why do you need a ring, Garrett? You don't wear jewelry." "No, I don't know, but it's not for me. I was kind of hoping you'd wear it. This is an engagement ring, and I was hoping that you would marry me and—" "Garrett Mance. This is the most lame proposal I've ever heard of. Is this the best you can do?" "Oh, well, never mind. I'm sure it is, knowing you. I shouldn't, but yes, I will marry you. Now let's see this ring." The smiling clerk stood next to them when Katie fell silent. She looked at Katie and said, "I have to agree with you, honey. Are you sure you want to marry a man who takes you for granted like he just did?" "Oh yes. You have no idea. Now let me see my ring." "Oh, it's great." She put it on her finger and jumped to hug Garrett. Soon the happy couple left the shopping center. Katie leaned against Garrett, resting her head on his shoulder and wrapping her arms around his waist. From time to time she raised her finger to look at her ring. That night, for the first time in their relationship, Katie did not go home after a date. "'Nuff said." The next morning, after their hug, Garrett said, "I think I'll call Mr. Douglas today and see what he thinks of your idea, Katie. If you and your mom continue to manage properties, we could do a couple. We might consider flipping houses, but I don't think I'm really interested in that for some reason. I have all the money I can spend and I really don't want to work that hard. Maybe I'll plant some crops on Grandpa's old farm and rent it out." Damn, that was enough for him. "We will have more income than him because I have his shares and I invested a lot of money that we got from the bank vault. There is also rental income and what I earn in the guard. No, I think this will be enough for me as I receive. The higher the rank, the more I will be able to take on additional guard duties from time to time and thus receive higher active duty pay. Okay, what do you think, honey?" Katie kissed him quickly and rushed to the door. Before she left, she said, "I need to go home and change so I can get to work. Mom will have to deal blow after blow before the morning is over, you can count on it. See you tonight." Mr. Douglas was able to see Garrett before he went home later that day. During the conversation, he said, "I don't see a problem with renting a home, Garrett, but I think you should form a limited liability corporation, LLC, to protect you from lawsuits. I can create one for you for about $250. I'll only need a day or two, and then we'll have to wait for the government to do its thing? It's a simple question. We'll call it GKM Properties, LLC. When he returned home that evening, Katie was waiting for him. Before he even sat down, she said, "Well, what did he say?" "He doesn't think it's a bad idea. He said we should form an LLC to protect us from lawsuits. He'll take care of it. We can go ahead and buy these houses. File documents as GKM Properties, LLC. Oh, and I really don't want anyone to know I'm involved in the property if we can help it. They'll see me working on buildings and they'll think I'm just maintenance staff or something. I want Mom to sniff, can I help? If she or B smell money, they'll be there." It took Garrett all summer to renovate the first two houses. They were smaller, about 1,200 to 1,400 square feet, and were rented as single-family homes. The other two were two-story square houses that he intended to turn into duplexes, with one apartment upstairs and one downstairs. They'll need more work, but when he's finished, each unit will be about 1,200 square feet. To his surprise, he rented two single-family homes before the renovations were completed. They rented for $900 a month each. He only had to pay $93,275 for all four houses. The cost of renovating the two houses already completed was an additional $27,000, and he expected to spend another $40,000 on the other two houses. It looked like he would make a return on his investment of about $3,300 per month, or 24.75% per year before expenses. Taxes, insurance, maintenance, etc. would reduce that amount somewhat, but at the time he had no idea by how much. Kathy said historically about 24% of gross rent went to expenses. Over the next year, Garrett renovated houses, then his apartment and bank. He did find time to get married in June, but the honeymoon only lasted a week before he and Katie returned home to work on their dream. They took time to fish and relax near a farm on the riverbank. Once the houses were built, Katie and her mom managed the rent the same way they did the bank apartments. They haven't yet decided what to do with the bottom floor of the bank building. Given the storage, they decided that it really should be some kind of office, so they renovated it. However, so far no one has wanted to rent it for an office. For the past 2 years, Betty Jean had moaned and groaned from time to time because she was tired of running the cafe. She was 63 years old and wanted to retire. Her husband was retired and she wanted to spend more time with him. One morning when they stopped for coffee, Garrett and Katie saw two new signs in the window. One said, "Going out of business, closing for good on December 31st. Another said, "For sale." After finishing their coffee, they went with Betty Jean to pay the check. Katie said, "I can't believe you're actually going to close. We will miss you very much. What are you going to do now?" "I really don't know, but it's time. I know we're going to be spending the colder months in Florida. I just hope we have the money to retire properly. We won't be wasteful, but we want to have a little fun before we die." "Well, I don't blame you for that. What do you want for the business?" "We really weren't sure, but we thought we'd try to get $170,000. Katie looked shocked, as did Garrett. She gasped and said, "Oh, Betty Jean. I know you have a pretty good breakfast and lunch exchange, but don't you think it's too expensive? We know it's a lot of money, but we almost have to make it worthwhile and pay the realtor's fees after we list it." "What? I don't understand. What is the rent for the building and how long are you under contract? That must be one hell of a fine." "Oh no, honey. We do not rent out the building." "Well, we rent, but we own both buildings and rent out the apartments above, like Garrett rents out a bank. We bought them back when Lynn's sold out. Remember when we rebuilt? We bought them just before we started the renovation work." "Oh, sorry, I didn't know. I think the 170 is still a little steep, but not too bad. We know it's expensive, but we wanted to give ourselves some wiggle room in the contract negotiations." That evening, Garrett watched Kathy work on her computer. He could tell she was working on some kind of spreadsheet, but he had no idea what exactly she was doing. As she worked, she moved between several spreadsheets and their Quicken program. Finally, she looked at Garrett and said, "Honey, I think we should buy the buildings from Betty Jean and her husband. If we had to pay the asking price, our gross rent would be almost 19% for the 4 apartments and the empty store building between the bank and the cafe, assuming the apartments rent for $400 a month each, and we would get $1,000 for the store. If we can get buildings for $150,000 and the same rent, we get almost 20.5%. I know that's not true. As much as we get for houses, but we don't have much in our houses. We have never considered our labor as a cost, and we buy buildings here in perfect condition. I don't care. We can do this if you want. God knows, we have money. The deal is the same as before though. You and your mom get to run them, and I'll continue to do the maintenance, and no one knows we own them. What about a cafe? You didn't mention it in your rent forecasts. I bet if you added it you could make about the same profit as the houses and apartments we own now. I'm surprised you forgot this. We're talking about what the hell are we going to do with the bank? As far as we go, no one seems interested in renting it for office use. I'm almost ready to stop trying. Katie looked a little guilty for a moment, and then said, "I left the cafe on purpose, and I think I've found a way to make good use of the bank's main floor. I want to run a cafe myself and serve breakfast and lunch. I only need a limited menu, but I want to try it for a while. If that doesn't work, we can always try again to find someone to run the cafe. Even if I don't work with my mom. Longer, she has problems with her boss. The asshole father of the asshole who attacked me is making life miserable for my mom and her boss. He threatens to take him home again from their management company because he doesn't want mom to work. I thought mom could open a real estate office and management firm in the old bank. I know we don't have a market here where she can make a lot of money, but she wants to slow down and semi-retire, so this would be a good deal. For her, I think she will manage our property for rent if you agree. I also thought we could cut a door between the cafe and the building next door so I could open a small grocery store. I think we could sell some things and it could also serve as a resource for the cafe. We could buy goods for our cafe through the store." Garrett shrugged and said, "I have no problem with your mom using the bank for her office, and I definitely like the free management services. Although I'm not too sure about the cafe and shop. Even closing the cafe after lunchtime, you're looking at a minimum of 10 hours a day, and the store will simply extend that time. You will have to open the cafe at 6 a.m., 7 a.m. at the latest, and you won't be able to close before 1:30 or 2 o'clock. The store should really open early and close no later than 6 p.m. You really should work all 7 days a week. When would we have time to ourselves if you did? I thought about it. I hope we can use Betty Jean's help. I know Doris runs the cafe when Betty Jean is away. Maybe she'll stay and do this for me. I also don't intend to have the same varied menu. Like now, I want to cook a traditional breakfast like now, but for lunch I only want hamburgers, fries, a few sandwiches and winter soup every day. I would suggest one daily plated lunch and definitely my pizza. Plate dinners are something easy and inexpensive to make so I can sell them at a reasonable price. If business goes well, we might even open on Friday and Saturday nights and have a nicer Sunday afternoon meal for the congregation. We could use the cafe's cash register to check shopping at the store, so no extra help is needed. I guess if you want to try, I'll go with you, but I want us to still have time for family. What about when we have children? I really don't want to use a babysitter." An offer was made, and since there was no realtor's commission, Betty Jean agreed to sell the buildings with all equipment for $155,000. Katie and her mother took over without any problems. To his surprise and Katie's delight, her updated menu and hours worked well. In fact, her business at breakfast and lunch has improved compared to Betty Jean's. There were a few people who grumbled about not being able to have dinner, but that went away. Her profit margins were actually better than Betty Jean's because they didn't have the additional labor costs for the usually easy day trading and the costs associated with dinner, which never sold well. The small store was profitable from the beginning, but the profits were small. It would be difficult for the family to live on the actual profits from the cafe and the store combined. One morning, Garrett was sitting in a cafe drinking coffee with the regulars when Pete and Trevor arrived again. After they ordered and joined the conversation, Trevor turned to Garrett and asked, "Hey, what did I hear about Bitchy be getting married?" "I don't know," Garrett said. "I haven't seen or spoken to her or my mom for months." "Who is this unfortunate man?" "Just one of the richest jerks in Neosho. She's marrying real money, that's it. I heard she's marrying Jeffrey Godfrey. They have a June wedding and everything. They've already demolished your grandfather's house and are building a monster. The mansion is in its place. You will be neighbors." Katie heard part of the conversation and said, "Oh, no. Does she know what he is like?" She turned to Garrett and said, "We have to warn her." "I don't know if she knows it or not, but if we warn her, it won't do any good. I suggest we get a copy of the article about his court hearings when he beat you and give it to her. I suspect it won't make any difference to us. You know, he has a real line where WH. And he's trying to get something, especially from a woman, he's probably whatever she wants. He's rich, or so she thinks." That evening, at Kathy's insistence and against his better judgment, Garrett called B. After a less than pleasant greeting, she said, "What do you want, Garrett?" "I'm busy." "B, I was in the cafe this morning and I heard that you are marrying that asshole Godfrey." "I wanted to talk to." B interrupted him and shouted into the phone, "You son of a bitch. He said you'll probably try to start rumors about him and keep us apart. You're just jealous of his money and situation in life. He's the kindest, sweetest man around, and everyone is so mad at him it's not funny. Yes, I am marrying him, and neither you nor anyone else can stop it." Having said this, she interrupted the connection. Garrett's phone was on speaker so Katie could hear everything. He looked at her and said, "Well, I tried. Let's forget about it." Garrett followed the construction of B's house, passing by on his way to his land. The rumors about the coffee shop were confirmed. Not only was the house a monster, but the money they spent on the entry gate and landscaping was out of sight. It's no surprise that Garrett wasn't invited to the wedding. He read about it in the local newspaper. The event was billed as the largest such event in the small town of Neosho in a decade. A happy couple will honeymoon, traveling through Europe, and then settle in a village near Neosho, in a new house that the groom's father gave them as a wedding gift. Garrett and Katie's life continued the same as before, except it was busier. The money was flowing in, and Garrett had little to do to earn it. Every day he saw him settled into a chair in a cafe having his morning coffee, breakfast and, in most cases, lunch. Locals wondered how a man working part-time as a maintenance man working such a small area could afford to eat out all the time. Most people assumed that Katie was feeding him for free since they were married and all. He was the talk of the town, and most said he was just like his grandfather. He farmed a small area and spent most of his time hunting, fishing, or just having fun. Yes, a real loser will probably succeed, even if he was a good guy. During the summer and the following winter, Beatrice occasionally drove through the city or stopped at the post office. She was seen much more often than before her marriage. She drove a beautiful Lexus SUV and was always dressed in designer clothes. Shortly after Christmas her visits had slowed down a bit, and once or twice her makeup didn't completely hide the bruises on her face and arms. One day she walked stiffly and seemed to favor her side when moving. Katie and Garrett talked to each other about her obvious plight, but knew there was nothing they could do to help her, at least not until she asked for help. They just hoped that the request for help would come before it was too late. Garrett didn't like her at all, but she was his sister and he felt sorry for what was probably happening to her. No one deserved the beating she probably received. One cold, damp March evening, Garrett heard someone slowly walking up the stairs to their second-floor apartment. He listened to make sure it was someone from the top floor before returning to the story he was reading while sipping Balvian. The outside door opened, then there was a timid knock on his and Katie's door. Katie was in the shower, so he sighed and set down his glass and book to answer. When he opened the door, Beatrice stood in front of him and cried. She looked terrible. There was a bruise on her right arm, and half of her face was red, as if she had been hit. She looked at Garrett and said, "I know you have no reason to help me, but please, can I stay here tonight, Garrett?" On the one hand, Garrett wanted to drive this little bitch away, but he couldn't. She was his sister, even though she was a bitch and seemed to have some problems. He would help most locals if they needed it. All this quickly flashed through his mind, but Beatrice fell further and began to turn away before he opened the door wider and said, "Come in, B. You can use the spare room tonight." Katie overheard their conversation and came into the room wearing a robe and drying her hair. She saw B and said, "B, what are you doing here? You look terrible." B cried and collapsed into a chair before saying, "You were right. He is an animal, a monster. He turned into a control freak on our honeymoon, and then when we got home he started hitting me. He said it was for my own good so I would learn from my mistakes, but the situation got worse and worse. I turned to my mom for help, but she told me to get over it, that he has the money to take care of us, and if not, then I have the money. Such a spoiled bitch that he won't have to punish me. Today I walked home from the store and he was in his office with this little whore he calls his secretary. He made her fuck her while bent over his desk. They just looked up and she said, 'Close the door and get out of here, bitch.' I didn't know what to do. Like an idiot, I closed the door and put away my shopping. I heard them laughing after I closed the door. Later I heard the little bitch leave, then Jeffrey came into the kitchen and pushed me towards the cabinets. He slapped me and told me never to distract him in his office again. I told him he didn't have to worry about it, that we were history and I was filing for divorce tomorrow. He laughed and said, "Okay, now get the hell out of his house." I refused to leave and he actually chose me. Picked me up and kicked me out of the house and then threw my purse behind me. I went to my mom and she told me to get my ass home and work things out with my husband, but I can't do it, I just can't. Katie walked up to B and hugged the crying girl. She just held it until it stopped and then said, "Go ahead. Let's give you a hot shower and then put you to bed." Things got worse for B after that night. She filed for divorce, and after going through the courts rather quickly, she got it, or rather, Jeffrey got her divorce. Unfortunately, the prenuptial agreement she signed at her mother's insistence failed her. In the agreement, she agreed that in the event the marriage ended in divorce, she would leave the marriage leaving only her personal property and $1,000 per month of the marriage, up to a maximum of $120,000. Unfortunately for B, this resulted in Jeffrey getting the house and land, even though B owned the land before the wedding. After the divorce worked its way through the court system, B and Jeffrey were married for just under 13 months. Now B was starting over with only clothes, jewelry, and $12,000. She argued over the missing $1,000 but did not receive it because the prenuptial agreement stated, if the marriage ends in divorce at any time, the wife is entitled to $1,000 for each full month of the marriage, up to a maximum of $120,000. Beatrice traded her land, worth about $80,000, for a month's tour of Europe, 9 months of work as a punching bag, and $12,000 in cash. She had no job or education to get it. True to form, Wilma refused to help her and even demanded rent so she could live in her family's home again. She eventually became Garrett's constant companion, much to his chagrin. Just because she was indebted to her brother, living in his house rent-free didn't dull BEA's tongue. She was still a bitch. She complained about everything every day. The apartment and bedroom were too small. She resented having to go to cafes for breakfast and lunch and the fact that the food there was so ordinary. What she hated most was when she had to interact with smelly farmers and their dirty, torn clothes. Finally, one evening everything came to a head. Before Garrett even realized the shit was about to hit the fan, it had already hit, passed through, and sprayed. Said rotating device had spread feces everywhere before the evening was over. Beatrice was at her best, or worst, depending on your point of view, when she ran out of the guest bathroom. She was in a robe and shaking a bottle of shampoo in the air. She threw the shampoo at Katie and screamed, "You stupid bitch. You know this is not the shampoo I use. I told you specifically what to buy and even where to buy it, and you come home with this crap. Honestly, I don't know. I don't know how you managed to do anything while being so incompetent." Garrett jumped out of his chair and grabbed B, who was trying to hit the stunned Katie. He pinned her arms to her sides and shouted, "Shut your damn mouth, bitch. I am completely satisfied with your attitude. We took you into our house when you were literally on the street and all you did was sit on your butt. Eat our food and complain about the home we provide for you. This shit will end now. From now on, you show Katie and I the respect we deserve, or you leave. If you can't speak politely, just keep your damn mouth shut. You will use whatever we decide to buy for our home, and if you don't like it, you can get a job and buy your own things. At worst, you will use what we buy and remain silent about it. Tomorrow you will start working for your livelihood or you will leave. You can go help Katie in the cafe or come help me at work, but you will work. In addition, from now on you can help keep the apartment clean. You are no longer a guest here. You need to start cleaning up here and packing up like we do. If you don't want to do that, you better damn well find a paying job somewhere so you can pay for your living. You can get your own home. Beatrice was so shocked that she stopped resisting and stared at Garrett. Finally, fire flashed in her eyes and her face turned red. She said, "It's nice talking to you, brother. You were so lazy that you refused to help your mom with the expenses on our house, and then you moved out when she asked for moan. Why to help with the bills? You haven't paid your rent at all. For the time you stayed at my house after Grandpa died and now you're complaining about helping me, that's bullshit, and on top of that, we both know you'd probably be on the streets right now if it weren't for the poor Katie, who worked hard in this half-shitty little cafe. Damn, you've probably never worked a day in your life. You think I didn't see you when you were supposedly farming? Damn, you rode around on your little tractor for a while and then headed out across the river, where you spent the rest of the day. I can imagine how hard you have to work in your small maintenance job." B turned and ran away. Soon they heard the shower running, then it stopped and the door opened. B never returned, so they assumed she was in the room she was allowed. Katie walked over to Garrett and allowed him to wrap his arms around her in a comforting hug. She soon wiped the silent tears from her face and leaned back to look into his eyes. Katie said, "I knew she was a bitch because I went to school with her even though she was a few years behind us, but tonight, bloody hell, tonight was incredible. I mean, she's been getting worse and worse over the past few weeks, but I can't believe she would explode like that. Believe me. I think that's why she managed to get her way for so long. It was easier and more pleasant for people to give in to her, so that she would not go out with them like she did tonight. Usually just a touch from Bitchy B will either bring the culprit to justice or they will leave. I suspect that at least some of her problems in her marriage stem from her being such a bitch. That doesn't give him the right to hit her, but of course I can. I get what I want. I know he's a serial cheater, but I bet she got him to this point faster than he would have gone on his own. Now, what are we going to do when she refuses to help here? You know that she is not going to willingly work here in the house, or with you, or with me. I really don't know what we will do if it doesn't help some people. I'm afraid if we don't more or less continue as we are now, she'll do something to get back at us for the diss. Her, as she calls it. Mom tried to get her to do something around the house once or twice before I left, and it turned out to be a disaster. If she couldn't ignore her mom's request, she would actually go into the room as if she was going to do anything and made a terrible mess. One day she had to cook dinner, and she deliberately burned everything and left all the cabinets filled with food. Mom left the mess for 2 days trying to get her to clean it up. But she didn't. When it started to stink, my mother couldn't stand it and did some of the work, and made me do the rest. Damn, I'm sorry I talked you into letting her stay here. Yes. The only thing I can think of is making her so uncomfortable that she will leave on her own. We can just keep coaxing her to help and, whatever you do, do not buy what she demands. This shampoo and conditioner was a great idea. She hates it when she doesn't get exactly what she wants. Katie giggled slightly and said, "Well, it was an accident. I think I actually bought what she wanted. The bottle she burst in here with is a new bottle for me. I didn't need it yet, but it was on sale. On sale, so I bought it. I must have put it in the guest bathroom by mistake. The other bottle is probably in our bathroom under the sink where I usually put my extras tonight. Are you ready for bed yet, darling?" The next morning, Garrett and Katie began a campaign to recruit Beatrice to help around the house, as well as the cafe, farm or rental house. When he got up to leave the house, Katie was already in the cafe. Garrett knocked on Beatrice's bedroom door until she answered. "What?" "It better be important, I was asleep." "It's time to start, B. Kat has been in the cafe for an hour already." Are you going to help her there or come with me? What? Are you crazy? No. I'm not going to help her, and no, I'm not going with you. I wouldn't be caught dead doing your or Katie's dirty work. Now go ahead and leave me the hell alone. B, we told you last night that the free ride is over. If you don't start helping here, I'll have to ask you to find somewhere else to live. Just get your lazy ass away from my door and leave me alone, B screamed. Garrett stayed in the house about 15 minutes longer than usual, making noise to keep Beatrice awake. He smiled 3 times as she screamed at him to shut up. Finally, he turned off the blaring radio and headed to the cafe for breakfast. Before heading out the door, he stopped and smiled a devilish smile. He returned to the living room and turned the radio back on, tuned to a country station that Beatrice hated, and then turned it up to full volume. He turned to the door once more to leave. When he left, he made sure to slam the door loudly. He laughed when he entered the cafe. Katie was at the register with one of the customers and smiled when she saw him. After the client left, Katie smiled and said, "I take it the princess isn't happy with you right now?" "No, I don't think she's very happy. She was screaming at me to turn off the radio as I slammed the door on my way out." Katie laughed and said, "So I can hear our radio." I thought Jess, one of the upstairs tenants, got up very early and turned his stereo on a lot louder than usual. I hope you don't piss off the tenants. Shit, I never thought about it. Well, it's too late now. If she doesn't turn it off in a couple of minutes, I'll go back and do it. About then they heard the radio stop, so they didn't think anything more about it. Katie went back to the kitchen to make Garrett breakfast. Garrett sat down with a few men and began visiting them while sipping his first cup of coffee. About 30 minutes later, he stumbled into the cafe and sat down at her usual table alone. After the waitress walked past her twice without stopping, he grabbed her on the third aisle and growled, "Aren't you going to take my order here? I know you are incompetent, but even you should see that I was not expected, yes, especially since you are the only waitress here now." Paula pulled her hand away from BA's grasp and said, "Yes, I know I didn't wait on you. Katie told me not to do it. She said that from now on you are responsible for your own food and cleaning. I'm really sorry." B looked back at the customers looking at her. Her face turned red, then she stood up and headed to the kitchen. She threw open the swing doors with such force that they hit the wall. She could be heard screaming at Katie from all over the room. "You're a bitch," she said. "How dare you tell that little tramp not to wait on me? This is a catering establishment, isn't it? I'm here to have breakfast and coffee. I'm really sorry, B, but we told you last night that the free ride was over. We provide services only to paying clients. If you would like to pay for breakfast, we will be happy to serve you. Otherwise, you can make your own when we don't use a frying pan. When you're done, you can move your table too if you're not a paying customer. After that, you can either go back upstairs and clean the house and do laundry, or help clean the kitchen here and prepare dinner. We are waiting for paying customers, and unless you live somewhere else and come here as a paying customer, my staff will no longer wait on you hand and foot." Angry, B ran out of the kitchen. As she walked away, she muttered, "Not likely, damn it." On her way out of the cafe, she grabbed a cup full of coffee and one of the packaged snacks they were selling without paying for anything. For the next few minutes, Garrett and Katie heard her stomping up the stairs, then it became quiet again. When Garrett left for work, he noticed that B's car was gone. Garrett repaired a couple of things over 2 rentals and then went to the farm to work there. He returned to the cafe for lunch, and after lunch he went upstairs to the apartment. When he got there, he discovered that B had taken the radio, ripped the plug out of the wall, and then threw the radio at the wall. The radio was broken and the drywall at the impact site was damaged. Garrett sighed and spent most of the day fixing the hole in the drywall. After the hole was patched, he sat on the balcony with Katie. Neither of them had seen B all day. Before dusk they made sandwiches and went to the farm to an old fishing hole where they fished, drank beer and relaxed until dark. While Garrett and Katie were by the river, he pulled her close and said, "I'm sorry I had to leave you with that bitch. If I knew this was going to happen, I would have told the guard that I can't go to OCS. I don't think it will be any easier for you if I'm gone, and you know I'll have to leave in another 10 days. Oh, don't worry about it. I can handle it. I don't know what I'll do with her, but I'll manage somehow. You worked hard for your chance to become an officer, and you deserve it. Just go, and do your best and don't worry about us. When Garrett and Katie returned home, B was still missing. They talked for a few minutes, then took a shower and went to bed. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, a very drunk B slammed the apartment door and loudly wandered through the house to her bedroom. The next morning, Garrett made sure B was awake again before leaving the apartment. This time, B, disheveled from sleep, opened the bedroom door and pushed Garrett away. She growled, "Listen, asshole, I told you yesterday that I would never do your dirty work. Now get your ass away from my door and let me sleep." Garrett nearly choked on the stench of her breath. It smelled like a brewery and looked like it had been driven hard and laid wet. Once again, when B went to a cafe to buy food, she was denied personalized service. This time she entered the kitchen around 11:30 a.m. and demanded breakfast. Katie told her again that if she wanted food, she could make herself a plate. B stood there for a minute and then growled, "Great." She walked up to the stove and roughly pushed the cook away. However, instead of preparing breakfast, she served up something of the day's special, prepared for the lunch crowd. After serving the food, B turned and walked rudely between Katie and the cook as she walked back into the dining room. It is significant that, although she grew up with many people in the room, none of them spoke to her either when she entered the cafe, or when she looked around for a table. Of course, none of them were in her company in high school, so they were also beneath her notice. She walked over to a table in the dark back corner of the room. She quickly ate her food, then stood up and left the room with an air of importance, confident in herself that she was God's gift to the world, the queen of all that she surveyed. She never bothered to clean up the mess after dinner, just leaving the dirty dishes on the table for the harried waitress to take care of. This night and the next two were a repeat of the previous night. Apparently, B closed the bar and then, God forbid, drove home and loudly stumbled upstairs to bed, drunk as an ass. Her morning mood didn't improve when Garrett woke her up and she came into the cafe to eat her first lunch of the day and left the mess as usual. On the fourth day, Friday, B did not return home. Garrett and Katie didn't see or hear from her until she showed up late Sunday night looking terrible. She had bruises all over her neck and black circles under her eyes. Garrett looked up as she walked through the door and said, "Where the hell have you been? We were worried about you. Why didn't you answer the phone or at least call and tell us you weren't coming home?" "Oh, forget it. I am a free white man, well over 21. I can come and go as I please and do as I please. I went out with friends and we spent the weekend. Now I live with it. I'm going to bed, I'm beaten." Garrett felt himself shake. He looked at B and said, "That's enough. I want you to leave this house tomorrow. I'm tired of paying all your bills and not getting any help, attention or respect from you. Now you're even worse about cleaning up after yourself than you were before our first conversation." B grinned and said, "I'm not a maid. I don't clean, clear tables, or do other menial tasks. Find me a meaningful job that pays well and I will work. For now, just shut your damn attitude, dude." B turned and walked into her bedroom. She soon came out, took a shower, and returned to the bedroom, where the door closed and the lights went out. The next morning, as usual, Garrett woke B up before leaving. After B had breakfast and headed out elsewhere, Garrett and Katie went upstairs and packed all of BEA's things into bags and boxes. Garrett drove BEA's things 17 miles to his mother's house. He couldn't open the door, so he left B's things on the screened-in porch. He was surprised that the yard needed mowing and didn't notice the for sale sign almost hidden by a bush next to the mailbox. Returning to Stella, Garrett changed the door lock to their apartment so B couldn't get in whenever she returned, no matter where she was. When he left, he stuck a note on her door telling her that all her things were at their mother's house and she could stay there for a while. Once again, shortly before 3 o'clock in the morning, B staggered up the stairs after a night of fun. This time the door did not open for her. Finally she saw the note on the door and took it down to read it. After reading the note, she began knocking on the door and screaming for Garrett. Finally, Garrett got out of bed and walked to the door. He did not open it, but spoke through it to B. He said, "B, we gave you every chance to help and stay here. You refused to help in any way and were rude to Katie, our assistant, and me. I've warned you multiple times, if you don't help and stop being such a bitch, you'll have to find somewhere else to live. Now come on, today I took all your things to your mom. You can download it for free for a while. Nonsense. You can't travel over 450 miles with my stuff and end up here in your bed again. Now let me in so I can sleep. I'm tired. What do you mean? You know Mom's house is only 17 miles from here. What kind of 450-mile nonsense is this? As if you didn't know. You know Mom's factory closed and she had to move to St. Joseph to keep her job. Why the hell do you think her house is on the market and you haven't seen her in 2 months? Let me in. Well, I didn't know. She never told me to squat, and neither should you. Either way, I'm sure she still owns the house, so go there and stay. All your things are there. He kicked the door and growled, "Asshole," and then rolled down the stairs to her car. Garrett followed her onto the balcony and watched her drive away. She wasn't doing too badly, so he decided to leave it at that rather than pursue her or call the police about her DUI. Neither Katie nor Garrett saw Hubby again before he left for OCS, but they began to hear rumors about her. She was regularly seen at one local bar or another, hanging out with the city's flamboyant cowboys. She was regularly seen leaving with them if they drove a nice car or an expensive pickup truck. On the eve of his departure, a couple of jokers in the cafe tried to persuade him to leave Katie to do the work while he went off to play soldier. One said, "I didn't think summer camp would start later this year. Why are you leaving right after you graduate from college this year? What are you going to do that is taking so long anyway? I hear you. We'll be gone for almost 6 months. Oh, I guess not much. They just had a school they wanted me to go to. I would have a new job when I returned and I needed training to do it. Damn, I thought you were a medic. They certainly can't teach you to be a doctor in 6 months, so what's the big deal? It's about a lot of things. How to manage people, tactics, weapons, and so on. It's mostly just regular army crap." Yes, that's right. In other words, you figure out a way to suck more money out of the government and you leave while Katie stays home and works her ass at that cafe. Shit. Garrett left on Saturday for a long drive to Fort Benning, Georgia. He attended OCS and then infantry officer basic course there before returning home. He was one of the lucky few who was able to take guard OCS with active duty Army personnel instead of taking weekend and summer courses from government instructors. By doing this, he will complete the course and receive his commission in just over 6 months instead of 2 years. When Garrett returned, he made sure no one knew about his changed status. He found that he rather liked being thought of as one of the boys who didn't do well. He probably had more money than most families in the city, and certainly with the guards' salaries, he had the same or more income. So he might just be one of the good old boys. Upon his return, Garrett continued to make minor repairs on properties owned by GKM Properties, LLC, and farm his small plot of land. Of course, it wasn't a full-time job, so he had plenty of time to fish and mess around. He never returned to work part-time for a construction company. His reputation as a loser continued to grow. From time to time the local business people said what a pity it was that poor Kathy had to work so hard to support this unfortunate boy. On top of that, the bastard was never home. He was always somewhere, playing guard soldier. On Halloween, after Jeffrey and his new wife got married 17 months ago, they threw a huge Halloween party at their home, which used to be a little piece of Beatrice on Old Man Maine's farm. Jeffrey, as always, chose a young, beautiful guest in a revealing costume and began to train with her. Penny, his current wife, became angry and jealous of his actions and reported it to him. As they became increasingly drunk, the arguments became louder and less guarded. Finally, Jeffrey gathered everything he could, pushed Penny and slapped her. Unfortunately for them, she was carrying a new bottle of Everlair whiskey, which they used to flavor their punch. She threw it at him when he hit her and it broke, spilling alcohol. This in itself wouldn't be so bad if some flammable alcohol hadn't spilled into the jack-o'-lantern with the candle inside. The alcohol flared up with a whistle. The burning alcohol penetrated further into the house, igniting the carpet, then the fire spread to the woodwork. It was already after midnight, and all the guests were drunk and staggering, trying to get out of the burning house. Finally, someone thought to call the rural fire department. They had a good time and the tanker truck arrived at the yard 17 minutes after the first call. Before the night was over, Jeffrey was in jail for assaulting his wife and his house burned to the ground. Of course, the next morning the topic of conversation in the cafe was the party, the fire, and the imprisonment of the wise guy Jeffrey. Life went on as usual for Garrett and Katie. He hunted, fished and rested, working only when it was really necessary, if the rental needed repairs or something needed to be done on the farm. Garrett also spent several days a year doing extra work for the guard. Katie helped him hunt and fish when she was not at the cafe or store if he was at home. Jeffrey's antics kept coffee conversations going all winter after a fight with his wife. First, he was actually found guilty of assault this time because his father's favorite judge was off duty due to major surgery. The imported judge reviewed Jeffrey's testimony, heard testimony from everyone involved, and found Garrett guilty, sentencing him to a year in prison. While he was in prison, Penny filed for divorce and, because of the attack, effectively ended the prenuptial agreement she was forced to sign. She left the marriage with almost all of Jeffrey's money, almost $1.7 million. The judge ruled that the house, land, and other property owned by Jeffrey personally were worth that amount before he started the fire, so she received a fair 50% of the marital estate. Unfortunately for Jeffrey, insurance refused to pay compensation for the fire due to the circumstances. Jeffrey was responsible for the fire by committing a crime. Somehow it was reported that Penny threw the bottle at Jeffrey as he hit it so hard that it knocked it out of her hands and broke, thus filling the candle with alcohol and starting the fire. Admittedly, this was possible, but not what actually happened, although records suggested otherwise. In the spring, after his release from prison, Jeffrey and his father came to the cafe during breakfast and sat at Garrett's table without asking if they could do so. This was a common procedure in the small cafe, but usually the people doing it knew and were friendly with those they were sitting with. This did not happen in the case of Garrett and Godfrey. Jeffrey had just been released early from prison due to overcrowding. Garrett and the townspeople were almost certain that the early release was the result of the elder Mr. Godfrey pulling strings behind the scenes to get his precious son out early, and not because of prison overcrowding. Either way, Garrett started to stand up as they sat next to him. Mr. Godfrey, the eldest, put his hand on his shoulder and said, "Please, Mr. Mance. I have a business proposal for you. Could we talk for a moment?" Against his better judgment, Garrett relaxed in his chair and said, "I guess, but I can't imagine what kind of business we could have with each other. As you know, Jeffrey received the house and property when he and your sister divorced. I'm sure you've probably heard about his unfortunate fire and what he got from the little whore he married after Beatrice divorced him. I will not bore you with my problems, except that they may have become an opportunity for you. I understand that your family owned the 20 acres of land he now owns for over 100 years before he received it in the divorce funds, and we thought you might be interested in buying the land back for a reasonable amount." Garrett frowned. He would really like to take this land back. He was just wondering what Godfrey thought was a reasonable amount and how they planned to fuck him if he agreed to the deal. He said, "Well, I might be interested, but I'm sure you know that I don't have a good-paying full-time job. I just do some small farming and rent out a few apartments for GKM. Thanks to these funds, as well as my salary as a security guard, Katie barely has enough food on our table, in the cafe and in the store. We thought about it and I think there is a way for me to make the purchase and reunite this little piece of land with the rest of the family farm. Land here sells for an average of $2,500 per acre without improvements. We are ready to sell you 20 acres for $46,000, and we will provide a loan with no down payment. You can make payments directly to my property management company. We will set the loan repayment period to be 10 years, $534.10 at 7% APR. Of course, after 3 years the note will increase and the outstanding balance will become due immediately unless we agree on a new loan. What do you think?" "I don't know. I really don't want to give that kind of credit. What if I can't pay it off in 3 years?" The elder Mr. Godfrey smiled and said, "Oh, nothing earth-shattering, I'm sure we could work something out, and just think, you'd put the whole farm back together again. Of course, we will need collateral to make. We would like the remainder of your land to be provided as collateral for the transaction. Here's how we can close the deal with no down payment. No penalties for prepayment? What if I'm late or miss a payment? Godfrey Sr. laughed and said, "Hell, we're neighbors, being a day or two late isn't a big deal, and if you miss a payment, you'll just have to pay a small fine and make it up as soon as you can. There will be no problems with early repayment of the loan. If you have that kind of money, we will be happy to take it." Both of Godfrey's men laughed after he said this and grinned at Garrett. "It really sounds too good to be true, but I'd like to keep the whole old place together. Let me talk to Katie." "Wait a minute, okay?" Both Godfrey smiled and Godfrey Sr. said, "By all means, talk to the little woman. If you can't make a decision without her input, I completely understand. Not all men are capable of conducting business without permission." "Understand." Garrett felt a surge of anger at the implication, but smiled and said, "Thanks, I won't be long." Garrett went into the kitchen and quickly told Katie what Godfrey was offering. He said, "I would love to have all the land back together and I could use the extra arable land too. Besides, I think this is a chance to tie it to these assholes. I'll make them write it into the contract. That we can make an advance payment, then instead of letting them take the bill to the place, we will give them a check when the deal is closed. This will deprive them of interest and land. I think this is an attempt. Them to steal the rest of the farm because they have no idea we have money. They think I'll default on my payments because I only work part-time, and then they'll have the rest of the old farm." "Sounds good, honey. If you want to do it, go for it. But how do we bring this into GKM along with the rest?" "Hell, we'll just buy the land, then file another quitclaim deed and give it to GKM. It will cost a little more, but shouldn't cause any real issues. Hell, in fact, when we pay him through the cashier's check, we will tell him that I resold him to GKM for a quick and big profit. You know, I've been wanting a new truck for a long time. I'll tell him I sold it to them along with other land to get money. Buy a fancy truck. With my reputation, I'm sure he'll believe it, and I'm also sure he'll be very angry about losing out on a supposed big payday. It'll be great." Garrett returned to the table and looked worried. Godfrey was afraid that the dove had flown from the henhouse. Garrett said, "I just don't know. Katie doesn't really think we can afford the payments and she doesn't think we need the extra land. She says I don't take good care of what I have and she doesn't want a bigger stone around our necks. Well, maybe we can work something out here. Don't give up. What if we, say, lower the price to $2,000 per acre and raise the interest rate to 8%, and then reduce the loan term to 8 years? We really need to keep monthly payments around $500 because that's what Jeffrey needs to even out his budget. Then this will be a very profitable deal for you. You get land for hundreds less than it's worth and all you have to do is pay for it. For 8 years before it becomes yours free and transparent." "Well, okay, but Kat will be angry with me. I'll see if Grandpa's lawyer can put together a deal for us." "Oh, don't worry about it. I have a standard real estate contract in my car. We can fill in the fields and use it, no problem." He turned to Jeffrey and said, "Son, run to the car and get my briefcase so we can complete this deal." Mr. Godfrey completed the contract faster than a ray, signed it, and then handed the pages to Garrett for his signature. Garrett read the contract and began to sign, then feigned reluctance and said, "I don't know. I really think I should ask Grandpa's lawyer to look at this. I mean, it says if I miss a payment or it's late, you can take the land and my deposit as damages. This is not what you promised." "Oh, don't worry. See here? It says here you can defer the payment if we all agree, and here it says you can pay early, as you asked. It's not a problem. This language is in all contracts, but they only exist for legal reasons." "Well, okay, but anyway, I'll ask Grandpa's lawyer to look at it. Can I call you in a day or two to arrange signing and so on?" "Well, I guess if you're afraid, we can wait a couple of days, but this deal may not last long. What I mean is that if someone else wants to buy the land and give us a better deal, we'll have to take it." "I understand. I'm sure I'll sign this document, but I need to be sure, you know?" As soon as Godfrey left, Garrett called Mr. Douglas and set up a meeting about the contract. He was given an appointment for the next morning. After Mr. Douglas reviewed the contract, he said, "I'm very glad you didn't sign it. The only good thing about the whole contract is the clause that says you can pay off the loan early. That's what interests me. I plan to fuck Mr. Godfrey the same way he fucked me and tried to fuck me. He thinks he can use this deal to steal the rest of our farm, I'm sure of it. Get back the land he has for almost $1,000 less than it's worth, plus forfeit the interest he thinks he will receive until I default on the loan. I intend to pay cash for the land on the day we close the deal. I'll sign the papers, and after they're signed, I'll give him a certified check for the full amount of the loan and get him to acknowledge the prepayment. He loses land, interest, and hopefully his character because I will pay from GKM and tell him that I resold the land to them for $3,000 an acre because I wanted to buy a new pickup truck. He has no idea what our net worth is and will think about it, hopefully during his pompous runs, spread a rumor that a slacker had sold the family farm in exchange for a new pickup truck, thereby cementing my reputation as a slacker. Douglas looked at the contract again. He said, hummed a couple of times, made a couple of notes, and then said, I think his will work. I assume you want me to attend the closing and help with the paperwork? Yes, sure. Should I call him now and see when we can close the deal? After Garrett responded, Mr. Douglas sat back in his chair and said, what bothers me is that you insist on being called a bum. You are a very successful person and give everyone the idea that you don't have a pot to piss in. You serve in the National Guard and are a company commander, a position that carries a lot of trust and responsibility, and yet you allow everyone to think that you are just an ordinary soldier. Are you doing this? I don't really know. At first I was just a slacker with no real drive or purpose in life. I enjoyed life as much as I wanted to live, without any noticeable income. It drove annoying people crazy, and I loved it. Now it has simply become a habit. I also don't want to seem like I'm bragging. Hey guys, I actually have several $1 million. In the bank and in the property, and I am the captain of the guard. You need to bow down and scratch me, right now. No, but you hold a position in the guard and society that you should be proud of, and you hide it. This is just not normal. I'm proud of my position, but again I don't want to brag. Those who need to know about my personal life know. Those who don't need to know don't know. At least now I know my friends. I have friends because they like me, not because they like my money or position. Having said this, Garrett called and smiled as he spoke to Godfrey, the elder. Garrett said, Mr. Godfrey, my lawyer says this is a very bad contract for me, but if I insist on signing it, he won't be able to keep me from doing it. I really want this land, so I'm going to do it. He said the deal said exactly what you told me, so we'll do it tomorrow. Can we sign documents at my lawyer's office? Well, I won't be able to leave the office tomorrow, but if you just want to come here and sign the papers, we can do that. I negotiate many contracts right here in my office. Garrett looked at Mr. Douglas, who nodded his head, yes. Garrett said, okay, Mr. Godfrey, we'll be there around 10 in the morning. This is fine? Great. See you then. Garrett heard Godfrey laugh before the phone went completely dead. The next morning went just as Garrett had hoped. He, Kathy and Mr. Douglas entered Godfrey's office shortly before 10 in the morning. They were ushered into Godfrey's office, where he and Jeffrey waited with smiles on their faces. They frowned slightly when they saw Mr. Douglas, but they couldn't say anything. Before anything else could be revealed, Mr. Douglas pulled a tape recorder from his briefcase, turned it on, and said, "It is my office policy to record all of our meetings so that each of us can be sure of what is said and what was agreed upon. Do you agree that we record this meeting in closing? Well, this is, not our normal procedure." I'm afraid this is truly non-negotiable, sir. I must insist. Oh, okay, Godfrey, first mate. Said with dissatisfaction, if you feel you have to. Mr. Douglas placed the recorder on the table next to him, took the contract out of his briefcase and handed it to Godfrey Sr. He said, "I advised my client that this contract was extremely one-sided in your favor and that he should not sign it, but he insisted on it. I am only here to facilitate an arrangement, so if you would please review this contract that I am told you have completed to ensure there are no changes, we can complete our business here." Yes, this is the contract I filled out for Mr. Mance a couple of days ago. I see that it still has my signature on it, so if Mr. and Mrs. Mance sign the contract, we can complete the deal. Well, there is one small detail. I have noticed that your son Jeffrey has not signed the contract, and my research indicates that he is the owner of the property in question. Well, technically that's true, but my company manages all the family assets. I am the president of the company, so I usually sign business documents. I understand, and that is your prerogative, but the property owner must also sign the documents, or you must provide a power of attorney authorizing you to sign for them. I must insist. This is, after all, the legal way to do it. This. Godfrey glared at Douglas, and the elder handed the contract to Jeffrey. He growled, "Here, sign the damn thing where I signed." Godfrey, the elder, turned to Douglas while the younger was signing and said, "The signature block made it clear that I was signing for Jeffrey. I assure you it is completely legal." Mr. Douglas smiled and said, "Joking me. We now know beyond a shadow of a doubt that this is a legal contract." Jeffrey handed the papers to Garrett and Katie and smiled as they both quickly signed the document. Godfrey Sr. quickly grabbed the signed contract and said, "Thank you. I'll ask my girlfriend to send you your copy in about a week. I'm afraid I have another appointment, so I have to ask you to go." "Sorry, but we need a copy of the contract now, and before we leave, we need to take care of one more thing. I want to make sure that there is no prepayment penalty in this transaction and that Mr. Mance can pay off your loan anytime he wants. Is this correct?" "Yes, sure. The contract says he can do this. He can pay off the bill in full anytime he has that much money." Both Godfreys laughed and turned away from the three sitting on the other side of the table. Godfrey Sr. thrust the documents to his secretary and said, "Here, make copies for everyone and make sure we each get 2 copies and the original. Hurry up, I have another meeting." After the secretary returned and handed out the papers, Godfrey stood up and headed towards the door. As he walked away from the table, he said, "Now I really have to go to my next meeting. I'm sure Darla can show you the way out." Mr. Douglas said, "Not so fast, please. Mr. Mance has already sold this land and wishes to pay you the full amount now so that you will pay off this loan so that he can pass it on to the next buyer of the land. I need you to take his check and give him a receipt for the purchase price and then note that the contract is paid in full." "What? You can't do that. The agreement was that we would bear the loan and you would pay us. We never said that you can resell the land." "No, that won't work. Mr. Godfrey, I must insist. I have a certified check from RKM Properties, LLC for the balance of the loan. They paid you a promissory note for Mr. Mance so that he could complete the contract of sale with them. If you prepare a receipt for this check and note that the contract is paid in full, then we can leave and allow you to come to your next appointment. We'll take care of filing deeds and other documents so you don't have to bear these costs." "No. I won't do this. This is not the same deal we made before. If RKM wants this land, they can come to me and we will make a deal." "Sir, they cannot come to you. The land in question does not belong to you or your son. It belongs to my client and he sold it. Need I remind you that this conversation is being recorded? The recording is admissible evidence. Support a breach of contract claim in court if necessary." Godfrey glared at Garrett and Douglas, and then the elder hissed, "Sons of bitches." He grabbed the receipt book and filled out the receipt, then wrote "paid in full" on the contract. He made copies, threw the originals to Douglas and said, "Get your crooked asses out of my office." As they walked away, but before they were out of earshot, Garrett put his arm around Katie's shoulders and said, "I think that was the easiest $20,000 I've ever made." They heard something heavy slam into something hard and the older one screamed, "Fuck. Damn those sons of bitches." Garrett and Katie wanted to tell the town how they fucked Godfrey, but decided it wasn't a good idea. However, they told everyone that he got a good deal on 20 acres of his old house and received enough money to put a 50% down payment on a new pickup truck. Of course, rumors abounded, and everyone knew, unless Garrett was lying, that the Godfreys had missed out on a lot in order for Garrett to do this. Garrett cleaned up the mess of the burned-out house and began cultivating the arable land. He continued to fish almost every day throughout the season. As winter approached, Garrett allowed hunting to fill his free time as the seasons changed and the season of game arrived. From time to time, one of the locals would comment on his life, usually in the spirit of, "I just don't understand how you can afford to sit in a cafe, hunt, and fish like you. Hell, I can barely make ends meet, need work from morning until dark. Garrett would just grin and say, well, my grandfather taught me to relax and enjoy life. I don't have many needs and very few wants, so we're fine. Then I take the time to spend it and enjoy life. I think when the kids get older and go to college things will get a little tougher, but damn, we're doing okay right now. Some of the locals, usually busy church workers, remarked repeatedly while listening to a member of the main family that it just didn't seem right that a slacker like Garrett and his family had such an easy-looking life, and they didn't make it. After all, their husband worked his ass off and they just got by, while Garrett just messed around, worked part-time and lived as well as they did. He, like his ancestors, lived in that old bank and watched the worker work while he was idle. No, it was simply unfair. For several years, a good hotel on the outskirts of Neosho was in dire straits. This was once a Ramada Inn. It had 80 rooms, a large lobby, a cocktail bar and a large restaurant with an indoor pool and hot tub. In short, it was a typical full-service Ramada hotel. Retention of the Ramada name failed, so the local name was changed. But for some reason the hotel continued to fall into disrepair. The owner eventually closed the hotel and tried to keep the cocktail bar and restaurant open, but they eventually closed as well. The building and almost a lot in the city block were put up for sale. Many times when Garrett and Kathy drove by the beautiful brick building, which still looked great from the outside, he would comment on the potential of the old building. He once said, "I don't understand why someone doesn't buy this old building and turn it into apartments and retail space. They could put a convenience store and gas station on the corner and use the lobby for the station. I think a small limited restaurant and bar would be killer profits too. I mean, you have a captive audience from apartments. Heck, you could even keep, say, 20 rooms for rent as a motel, and if they didn't. If you rent them, you can always turn them into apartments. 60 of the 80 rooms converted into apartments, say 10 two-bedroom apartments and 21 bedroom apartments, would leave 20 rooms to be rented out either by the week or as hotel rooms. To be conservative, apartment rent if the building were fully leased would be about $17,000 a month. It's hard to say how much income you could make from a bar, restaurant, convenience store, and fuel sales, but I'm sure it will be there. If the owner didn't want to run the business himself, he could charge a reasonable rent for the premises and, say, get a percentage of the gross revenue or profits. I actually think that would be doable. After he finished talking, Kathy said, well, it seems to me that either you are the only one who has this vision for the building, or there is something that is stopping others from doing it. It's been on the market too long for any reason. I think you need to put your money where your mouth is, or at least check out the possibility. When the conversation took place, they were stopped at a traffic light near the building. Katie grabbed a pad and pen and wrote down the agent's phone number. As Garrett pulled away from the now green light, Kathy called the listing agent. When she told him what she was calling about, you could hear the change in his voice. He almost begged her to meet him there. He said he could be there immediately if she could. Katie looked at Garrett and said, honey, the agent says he can come to our hotel right now if that's what you want to do. He seems very worried. Garrett sighed and said, I think we could. We have the whole day, and our affairs will not take much time. Okay, but I still think something is wrong, otherwise the building would have been sold sooner. We need to be damn careful with this. Garrett and Kathy learned that the hotel was on the estate and the executor was eager to sell it so they could complete the closing of the estate. It was priced at $1.3 million, down from $2.7 million. Hearing this, Garrett grinned at Katie and said, well, that's a little steep, but I might be interested if it works out. Of course, we need to do our due diligence and I need to thoroughly inspect the building to see what repairs and upgrades are needed. Can we get the keys or would you like to stay with us while we inspect the premises in more detail? Well, I thought that's what we're doing here today. No, today we are looking at properties to see if they might interest us. I think it's safe to say yes, but I need to know how much more I'll have to spend to get it into rentable condition if we buy the building. Well, how long do you think it will take? I'm not entirely sure. I think I can complete the inspection in 3 to 4 days if I have access to the building. Oh, I can't spend that much time here with you. I'm very sorry, but it's simply not possible. Well then, I suggest you find someone who will stay with us during the inspection, let us in unattended, otherwise we will have to refuse the deal. Of course, I don't want to buy a pig in a poke here. I am extremely reluctant to make any offers until I know the condition of the building. Of course, any offer will be contingent on the seller providing a clear understanding. Ownership and either eliminates serious defects or pay monetary compensation for them. What do you need to propose right now? My seller is really interested in selling this building. As I stated earlier, this building is in the estate and must be sold so that the executor can close the estate. The seller is extremely motivated. Let my wife and I talk for a few minutes and we'll see. I don't promise anything. Do you understand that we are simply inspecting the premises for our employer? If we recommend a purchase, RCM will carry out the purchase. Properties, LLC, if we do a deal? It's not a problem. Why don't I just come over here and let you talk for a few minutes? If it helps, I would be happy to discuss this building with someone from the RKM Properties office. No, that's not necessary. We have the authority to negotiate and sign contracts for businesses. Katie watched the agent leave and then turned to Garrett. She said, "What's on your mind? You probably won't think about making an offer until we've inspected each room and seen what condition they're in. We don't even know if the heating and ventilation are working or what condition the roof is in or anything like that. All we know now is that the building's public areas have not been vandalized." Well, we know a little more. I went to the toilets next to the bar and cafe and they are quite shabby. They will need a complete renovation. The decor of the restaurant and bar is pathetic as is. In the lobby, the pool has an unfinished, plain concrete floor with painted cinder block walls. I don't see any signs of roof leaks in public areas. I think we need to make an offer at a super low price, then if it is rejected we will refuse. Threaten to leave again unless we can come in and do an in-depth inspection. Fine. You're the boss here. What number were you thinking about? Oh, I thought I'd hit him with $500,000. If they refuse an answer, I'll go 3/4. Katie laughed and said, "You're an asshole. We could completely strip out the interior for that price and come out ahead. Go for it." When the agent saw the couple walking toward him, he smiled and said, "Well, shall I put in an offer at the asking price? I assure you that at this price the building is a steal. You can't rebuild this building for that kind of money, less than $4 million. Well, we will make an offer, but not for this amount. Since you will not take the time to allow us to inspect the building completely and in detail, we are only willing to pay $500,000. Include this amount in the title offer at closing. And we'll try. Of course, we'll need to do a title search to make sure we get clear ownership and so on as usual. We also require termite inspections and general inspections, which are typically performed on transactions. You can get them from Katie here. For precise wording in the contract. She's an agent at another agency, so she knows about that part of the business. The agent's face fell and his smile disappeared when he heard the offer price and that he would be dealing with another real estate agent. However, he bravely pulled out his papers from his briefcase and began to fill them out. "However," he said, "I really don't think the performer will accept this offer. It's almost insulting. In fact, I have to tell you that I advise him not to take it." "Well, you'll both do what you have to do, but need I remind you that this property has been on the market for 3 years? I bet we are the first to make any offer during this time." After the documents were signed, Garrett and Kathy continued to carry out their assignments, and the agent went to get a response to their proposal. 2 days later, Garrett received a call from an agent. After the usual pleasantries, he said, "Mr. Mance, the executive agrees with me on the price you offered for the motel. He refused, but made a counter-offer. He will give this place even for $1 million. No, that won't happen. I'll tell you what. I think I underestimated you a little. I will raise my offer to $600,000. The agent trudged a little and then said, "That won't do. I'm sorry we couldn't do business." "Yes, me too. Tell your director, if he wants to be reasonable, my offer will stand until I receive a signed waiver or within 3 weeks. The following Monday, Garrett received another call from his agent. This time he was so obsequious that Garrett almost got goosebumps. The agent said, "Mr. Mance, congratulations, you have purchased a motel if you will only accept a small price increase." The contractor says he will take $675,999 for the building and lot, as is. Can you do this for us, please? Sir? Garrett didn't even think before he said, okay. The deal is completed. I assume you will bring the completed contract to our office so we can sign it and give you a little deposit? Yes, sir. I can be there in about an hour if that's convenient for you. It took more than 2 months to close the motel deal. After this time, Garrett spent another month searching every space in it and writing down what he needed to do with the building. Unfortunately, this building was in a municipality that had zoning and building codes, so he had to follow them. All work had to be done by certified, licensed craftsmen and approved by building inspectors. Luckily, Garrett had all the necessary building, plumbing, and electrical licenses, so he was able to do the work himself. The plan was to renovate one floor at a time. They will rent it at discounted rates until construction is completed, and then increase the rent to the final amount. It took Garrett 13 months to get the first apartments on the second floor ready for rental. Of course, he also renovated the pool area and filled the pool and spa for tenants to use. The common area has also been renovated. The bar and restaurant were blocked and remain in the same condition for now. He then began work on the lower floor, again taking almost a year to complete. To his surprise, when he posted an ad for the downstairs for rent, he received a call from the director of housing at the local college. They wanted to rent the entire floor and use it as an overflow dorm. They offered the current price for the rooms and a 3-year contract if Garrett agreed. He and Katie jumped at the offer. Now all they had to do was get permission to install gas stations and open a convenience store, then finish building a bar and restaurant. These tasks became very important now that all the apartments were rented out. They hoped the students would spend a lot of money on 3 small businesses if they were able to open them. They even agreed to use one of the small offices as a study and student lounge. It took Garrett another 6 months and too much money to complete these 3 tasks, but he did it. The bar was the first business to open. From the very beginning, it was a profitable business. The convenience store and gas station were more or less breaking even, and the restaurant was only making about $1,000 a month in profit. They decided to keep the 3 businesses open for at least a 2-year period, unless they started losing money quickly, to see if business improved. Shortly after construction was completed, 2 events occurred that would have a direct impact on Garrett's future career. They received a contract to rent out conference rooms at a hotel to a political party for meetings. Garrett was available that evening and opened the rooms for the meeting and then stayed nearby in case they needed anything. There he first met some public policy figures. He had been promoted to major 3 years ago and knew some of the names. When they found out he was in the Guard, they started playing the game, did you know? Over the next 3 years, RKM Properties continued to grow, and Garrett became more involved in public policy, interacting with influential people both in the Guard and in the political arena. Garrett was promoted to Lieutenant Colonel, LTC, and assigned to the state's National Guard headquarters. 4 years later, he was again promoted to the rank of Colonel, COL, and assigned to a more responsible position. He now spent nearly 2 weeks a month in the state capitol or traveling around the state on security duties. He spent most of this time on active military service. His friends in town were still laughing when they found out he was away on security duty again. One day he was having breakfast before leaving for another trip, and one of the jokers said, "What the hell are you doing for the Guards, Garrett? Hell, you're always going to security meetings or something." "Oh, I basically just tell them how to run things now and make sure they do it right." Everyone laughed at this. Garrett's units were always several miles from home, and he still hadn't told anyone his rank or position, so everyone thought he was some mid-level sergeant milking the teat for all he could. 2 more years and another election was on the horizon. This time, one of Garrett's friends, a state senator, was running for governor. One evening, he and Garrett were sitting in a small bar near the Capitol discussing the election when a friend said, "I think I can win this case, but the coffers are empty. If I don't come up with the money in the next week or so, I'll have to stop advertising and give up most of my paid help." This would be the equivalent of handing over the election to Monty, and we know what that would mean. Oh hell yes. This bastard hates my ass. I crossed his path a few years ago when he was trying to find his nephew a cushy job at headquarters for which he was not qualified. He's been stalking my ass ever since. I would probably have to resign if he was elected. Short of this, he will destroy the state. All his friends and their pork barrel policies will bankrupt him. We are now teetering on the brink. What do you need to continue living the way you are? Cedric snorted and said, You mean besides a miracle? I currently spend about $25,000 a week. There are still 3 weeks until the election and I should increase my advertising to attack him. This would, at a minimum, require me to double my weekly expenses. So, if I hear you correctly, you need at least another $150,000 to get you through until the election. I could help with that, but I don't know a damn thing about election laws and contributions. If I can find the money, can your staff work on it so we don't have any problems? Well, hell yes. That's what they are for. But where the hell do you find that kind of money? Well, I have a few dollars, but I can get more from RKM Properties. RKM Properties. How the hell can you get anything from them? I didn't know you moved in these circles. Garrett looked around and lowered his voice before saying, What I'm about to tell you is confidential. My family and I worked very hard for years to keep this a secret. The farm I maintain for RKM. I used to do all this, but now the business is so big that they hire several full-time maintenance people. My wife and her mother work in the office and manage part-time. Cedric interrupted with a snort and said, Come on, Garrett. We're friends, but now you're telling me that your civilian job is as a repairman at RKM, and you think you can get them to give up that kind of money? I'm almost offended. What makes you think they would even talk to you about a donation, let alone give it to me? Garrett became angry with his friend and nearly stood up in anger and walked away. At the last moment he remembered what he was talking about and clenched his jaw. He took a few deep breaths and partially composed himself before answering, Yeah, asshole, I think I can get them to write you a check. If you keep your damn mouth shut for a minute, maybe I can explain. Cedric's face turned 2 shades red when Garrett talked to him like that. His eyes sparkled and he glared at Garrett. He said, Garrett, we're friends and that's all that's saving your ass right now. Nobody talks to me like that. Nobody. You're on thin ice now. Something tells us that ends our friendship. Garrett looked at Cedric for a moment and then said, Look, give me a minute and stay away from your arrogant horse. Like I started saying, my family and I don't trust anyone with what I'm about to tell you, but yes, I know I can get RCM to write a check for $150,000 if we can do it legally. Cedric looked at Garrett. The man was so confident that it surprised him, but it happened with a bird on each of his shoulders. He decided to give him the benefit of the doubt and listen to what Garrett had to say. He took a deep breath and said, Okay, how are you going to do this? Garrett smiled and said, I own RKM. They usually do what I tell them. What? Do you own RKM? Do you own the largest property management company in Southwest Missouri? I thought you just said you were one of the technicians. He frowned and continued, How did you do it? Better yet, how the hell did you keep this a secret? No, it doesn't matter. Would you really be willing to do this for me? His eyes narrowed for a moment and then he asked, What will it cost me? Garrett looked him in the eye and said, Less than you think. We both agree on what the state needs now. I want you to stay true to your beliefs and not give in to the special interest groups that will try to influence you while you are in office. That's all. I'm happy in the Guard and I want to stay in a leadership position for as long as possible. I don't want anything else. Cedric smiled and held out his hand for Garrett to shake. As they shook hands, Cedric said, The deal is done. I will ask my people to contact you or whoever you are talking to sort out all the details. Within 2 days of the conversation, Cedric's campaign and his political party, using soft money donated to the party to educate voters about Cedric, took a swipe at good old Monty. He was so confident that he had Cedric on the ropes that he relaxed, but even if he hadn't, his chests were almost as empty as Cedric's. He couldn't keep up with expenses and lost momentum. His party was unable to fill the gaps in his finances quickly enough. The day before the election, polls showed Cedric leading by almost 11%. Hearing this, Monty growled, Where the hell did that bastard get the money? I was confident that we had beaten him, and we would have done it if not for the money he found at the last minute. I want to know where they came from, and I want something to be done about it. Election day turned out bright and sunny. Surprisingly, the turnout was higher than usual, and the majority of voters sided with Cedric. 2 hours after polls closed, national news channels predicted that Cedric would win the gubernatorial election by a margin of 67% to 33%. Garrett and Katie were at Cedric's campaign headquarters for his victory party. While making his rounds, Cedric stopped and visited Garrett and Katie for a moment. He shook Garrett's hand and said, "I don't think I could have done this without you. I am indebted to you. I won't forget what you said at our meeting, Garrett. I need to talk to some people now to make it happen, but they are counting on it." The next morning, Garrett and Katie returned home and Cedric began gathering his administration. One of the first things he did was to assign a project to a senior member of his project staff to conduct his first assignment. 3 weeks later, this employee came to Cedric and said, "Governor, I have everything ready. All you have to do is make the announcement and then General Mance will need to fill out some paperwork. The National Guard Bureau will help secure his appointment." Luckily, he had already completed all the educational requirements, so all that was left was a few minor rejections and finding the right people to do the paperwork. "Great. Call him on the phone for me, okay?" When Garrett answered the phone, an aide said, "Please wait until the governor-elect, General." Garrett frowned and looked at the phone, waiting for Cedric to come on the line. Katie saw him looking at the phone and asked, "What's wrong, honey?" "I had the strangest phone call. One of Cedric's assistants called and asked me to wait for Cedric, and he called me the general. I thought all the assistants knew I was just a colonel." At that moment, Cedric came on the phone and said, "Hello, General. Thank you for your support. Sorry it took me so long to respond to you, but we had to overcome several difficulties to get everything ready for you. How soon can you get back to Jefferson City so we can hold a press conference? A press release regarding your appointment will be issued this evening for publication at state headquarters so that you may also complete your paperwork as soon as possible." What? You weren't listening, General? I said. I heard what you said. I just don't understand general things. You know that I am a colonel. Hey, you stepped up for me. Now it's my turn to speak in your place. I promised that you could remain in the Guard in a senior position if I was elected. I keep my promises, General. They need to process your documents and begin their orientations to quickly get up to speed in your new position. You also need to find an assistant and decorate your office if you want. I don't understand. What kind of help in office? Jesus, dude. What, were you drinking or something? I promised that you would be appointed Adjutant General if I was elected, and now you have done it. Are you trying to tell me you changed your mind or something? No, I'm just Adjutant General? I'm just trying to get to the bottom of things, that's all. Cedric laughed and relaxed before saying, I understand. Hell, I felt the same way when they announced that I won the election too. You can handle this. When will you be able to come up here? Soon, the day after tomorrow? I have a couple things to do here tomorrow and I want to bring Katie, so she needs to arrange for someone to pick up her work. Garrett hung up and nearly collapsed back into his chair. His face was almost white. Katie walked up to him and asked worriedly, What's the matter, honey? You almost look sick. Garrett seemed to shake himself and looked at her. He reached out and pulled her onto his lap and then said, I just got a new job. This is cool. What is it? Is that why we need to go to Jefferson City? Yes, but that's not all. We'll be moving there for at least the next 4 years, maybe 8. You either need to close the cafe or find someone to run it. Oh, and the shit is going to hit the fan tomorrow morning. I'll come to the cafe to help you clean it up. Why should we move? I like it here, and I think you will too. Well, yes, but the new job is full-time, and I will have to do it in the capital. Cedric thought that when I gave him campaign money, I was making a deal with him when I told him that all I wanted was to remain in the Guard in a senior and responsible position. He appointed me adjutant general of the state. If I don't screw up the numbers, I'll have 8 years, assuming he leaves office, we can retire and come back here. In my opinion, the pension of a major general is much, much better than that of a humble colonel. As he expected, the next morning the cafe turned into a madhouse. To make matters worse, the press release announcing his appointment as adjutant general also mentioned that he was the sole owner, along with his wife, of the largest property management company in the southwestern part of the state, RKM Properties. When Garrett walked into the cafe that morning, the noise stopped and everyone turned and stared at him as he took his usual seat. You could hear the proverbial pin drop. Finally, Cheeky Trevor broke the ice. He said, "You sneaky bastard, you own RKM Properties and none of us ever knew. You told us that you are a repairman. And you're the damn general of the guard? Why the hell didn't you tell us? You always told us that you gave the soldiers tasks and then went around and made sure they did it. Damn it, you let us believe you were a fucking sergeant or something." Well, I didn't lie to anyone. In my free time, I did maintenance on the RCM, gave the soldiers work and checked how they behaved. All I really did was that it didn't matter. I had friends and I lived the way I wanted. I got to hunt, fish, and do whatever I wanted to do. Office and running the company, I would be too busy to do those things. We hired assistants to take care of management, and my mother-in-law and Katie kept up with the accounting and general management. Gradually the noise level rose to normal. As you might expect, Garrett was the topic of conversation in the local newspaper, which was widely circulated. Every time he looked up, Garrett found someone looking at him. Kathy promoted her chef to manager of a cafe and small store when she and Garrett moved to Jefferson City. Neither Garrett nor Katie ever felt completely comfortable living in the capital and not attending all the parties and high-profile events that his position required. They truly enjoyed the travel opportunities his position afforded them. When Garrett went away for a meeting, he took Katie with him, and they usually managed to turn the trip into a mini vacation. During their 7th year in office, Garrett and Kathy built a new house on the farm, which they used as a nursing home. When the governor left office, Garrett made it clear that he was resigning and they needed to find a new adjutant general. When Garrett retired and returned home, the first thing Garrett did was buy John's new boat to use for fishing. Once fishing season opened, he and Kathy could be found walking up and down the river, fishing and enjoying their twilight hours. Both of their children followed Garrett into the guard and worked civilian jobs in the business. They, too, could often be found fishing and lying on the riverbank. It seemed that Garrett had raised another generation of slackers. However, this generation was the talk of the community because it was now known that they had money and were just messing around rather than spending it.